Could we all please settle down? We will begin today's event in about 3 minutes. Okay. Good evening, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to St. Ignatius Church and today's forum, the death penalty. Is it a deterrent? This is posed as a question. And a deterrent is something that discourages or is intended to discourage certain behavior. Okay, I'm sorry, you can't hear from the back? Can you hear now? Okay, hold on a minute. Closer, okay. Is this better now? Okay, very good. So let's carry on. My name is Joseph Lutz. I'm a member of the Malaysian Bar, and I'm the Vice President of the Catholic Lawyers Society of Kuala Lumpur. To discuss our theme, we have 4 distinguished speakers. Each speaker will be given 20 minutes to make their presentation and to seek to persuade you to their views. At the end of the speech by our 4th speaker at around 9:30 this evening, we will have a 30-minute Q&A session. We encourage participation in this Q&A, and you may Twitter your questions to, the ID is ARCHKL, ARCHKL. We will select the most interesting questions, and our panel will attempt to answer them. Our moderator for this evening is Dato' Joy Apukutam. Dato' Joy is a member of the Malaysian Bar. He is a past president of the Catholic Lawyers Society, and he is a member of this parish. To start off, could you kindly welcome Reverend Father Andrew Wong, parish priest of SIC, to say a few words.
The honorary speakers, members of the press and media, my fellow parishioners, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. Welcome to St. Nature Church this evening for this important forum on death penalty, which I'm sure will be serious by nature, but something that will concern all of us, especially from the point of view of human rights and the fourth commandment, which is, thou shalt not kill. Some would say that we are not affected by the death penalty, as it will not happen to us. Others would say, those who are convicted and sentenced with the death penalty deserve it. This is a current topic of far-reaching effects as we consider that Malaysia intends to abolish it in the immediate future. Today, we are very fortunate to have an outstanding panel of judges and religious to be with us to enlighten us on this subject. Yang Arif Dato' Mawin Kwai and Yang Arif Tuan Judges Singh will present the views from the law, while Prams from the Buddhist Society, our Reverend Father Michael Chua from a Catholic Church will comment on the religious aspects. I hope you will take this opportunity to field questions and seek clarification during this session to make this evening a very beneficial one. Without taking more time, I leave the panel to commence the session. Thanks you once again for all your presence at this forum and showing interest in this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Father Andrew Wong. Once again, a good evening to everyone. Right, I like the spontaneous response here. Before I embark on inviting the speakers to present their text, let me just share a few things with you on this topic of death penalty. Now, if you look around, you'll find that about 53 over countries still maintain the death penalty across the world. You'll find them being imposed in various forms and formats. It comes in the forms of lethal injection. It comes in the form of firing squad. It comes in the form of hanging, as in Malaysia, decapitation, and also it comes in the form of stoning. Countries that have a stern record according to Amnesty International on death penalties, China's got one of the largest with 1,551 people that have been executed. US 23, Malaysia stands at 4. Now, the topic's important. As Father has just mentioned, we have control of whatever's happening in the new Malaysia. We make the decision, we make the choice, we tell the government this is our position. So without much ado, I'm going to invite the speakers to speak on the topics. I'm going to I will start with, yes, I will start with Yang Arif Dato' Ma Weng Kwai first. Dato' Ma has got an illustrious career. I'm going to go through the main parts of his bio data. You'll find that the brief one is just up on the screen. He's been called to the English bar as Barrister at Law at Lincoln's Temple in 1971, called to the Malaysian bar as an African solicitor in 1972. All right. He served in the judicial and legal service in various positions, from magistrate, sessions court to senior registrar, federal counsel, and so forth. He did his master's in law, and he was also the Malaysian bar president, apart from being the president of the Law Asia from the period 2006 to 2008. Datuk Ma was appointed a Judicial Commissioner in 2010, a Judge of the High Court of Malaya in 2011, Judge of the Court of Appeal Malaysia in 2012. Retired from the bench in 2015 and assumed the position as a consultant in the firm of Marvin Quine Associates. He is now a member of the advisory panel of the Faculty of Sharia and Law of the Islamic Science, University of Malaya, USIN, adjunct professor in Law and Government at Help University. He is a director and board directors in Asunta Hospital, legal consultant in St. John's Ambulance, as well as he's on the Asia International Arbitration Panel of Arbitrators and a certified mediator. Datuk Ma currently serves as a commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, Malaysian Aviation Commission, MAFCOM, and recently appointed to the Judicial Appointment Commission. Now, Datuk Ma has got an important role which he played recently after 9th May. That is, he's a member of the Institute of Reforms Committee, established by the Council of Eminent Persons after the 14th general elections of Malaysia in May 2018. And this committee was to make recommendations for institutional reforms to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. That is the brief biodata of Datuk Ma. The lengthy one goes in extensive. You can meet him after and discuss with him on it. Now, so I won't delay any further, but I'll invite Datuk Ma to present his paper. Thank you.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for those kind words of introduction, Dr. Joy. Reverend Fathers, I see many familiar faces, members of the bar. Many of my residents from Tropicana are here as well. My honorable fellow speakers and friends. I was asked by Dr. Joy about a week ago, 10 days ago, to come along to give a talk on this very important topic. Now, it's not so much going to be a talk to, but more of a talk with all of you present in this room to discuss what is essentially a very, very important issue. Now, I'm not sure whether you can see the screen. For those of you at the back, you must be having 20/20 to see it. But can I have, oh yes. I won't be stuck on this slide the whole night, don't worry. But how do I work this? Okay. I'm a IT dinosaur. Right. So, this topic, of course, is simple as it may sound. Death penalty, is it a deterrent? And if we were merely to say, yes it is, or no it is not, then it begs the question. I think what we need to know, very importantly, will be the circumstances that lead to this state of affairs. How is it that we have the death penalty in the first place? What does it do and how it applies to the Malaysian context? So I have taken the liberty to go through many of these slides. I will not spend too much time on it, but it's a source of reference if you like to check it out, and then it can be for further Q&A. Now, this is a promise made by Pakatan Harapan in their manifesto, and this is promise number 27. Those of you who have been following the manifesto, you will know that this is one of the many promises. But of course, the Honorable Prime Minister Tun Mahathir, when he was asked many times about the manifesto, he did turn around and say, it isn't the Bible, isn't it? You remember this? So I suppose it's all a matter of political will, if you like. It's all a question of circumstances and how is it that we are going to have this introduced. Now, very quickly, right, the whole idea of this, objectives of this panel discussion is actually to maximize awareness of the death penalty, to understand the principles of sentencing, because you must know what is it that the courts do in terms of sentencing, to consider death penalty from religious and human rights perspectives, and to consider public opinion. Now that's where you come in as the last bullet point to have your opinion. But can I just pose this to you at the start of this whole panel discussion, and that is, think to yourself, right now, before you hear any of us, what is it that you are thinking about the death penalty? Are you in support or are you not? You don't have to tell anyone about this. Keep it to yourself. And then, after you have heard all four of us and further Q&A, then ask yourself this question. Have you changed your view? Have any of us managed to change your views one way or the other, right? And then share your views with us at the end. Can I ask you to... Thanks. So it's pretty dark here. Some statistics. Now, Dr. Joy has already mentioned this, but a quick whip through of this stats. 106 countries have abolished the death penalty by law, right? So as far as their statutes are concerned, these countries have abolished it. 7 countries retain the death penalty only for serious offenses, example, during times of war. 29 countries have retained the death penalty in law, but they have not executed in the last 10 years. So in other words, in practice, they do not carry out executions. Now, Malaysia is one of the 56 countries which retain the death penalty by law and carries out execution. Okay? And the offenses that are punishable with the death penalty in Malaysia, two types. Is that too bright for you? Can you all see? There are 14 mandatory offenses under various acts, but some acts will have more than one offense. And where it's discretionary is also 14 in number. What it means here is that when it's mandatory means the court has no choice but to pass the death penalty. But if it's discretionary, the court can exercise its discretion. Next, please. The death penalty in Malaysia, next. Now, capital punishment in Malaysia, to give you an overview, what is our system? Very simply put, ours is a common law-based system. We inherited this system from the British, and of course, we also have a co-jurisdiction in Sharia law. Next, please. And when we talk about death penalty in Malaysia, it is death by hanging, right? Dr. Joy has mentioned in other countries you have firing by firing squad, lethal injection, electrocution, and so on. Now, persons below 18 at the time of the offense, pregnant women, and persons of unsound mind are not to be sentenced to death. These are the only categories that will be exempted from the death penalty. And Amnesty International reports that at least 800 people were sentenced to death in Malaysia as of December 2017, with at least 38 persons sentenced to death last year. Next, death by hanging. Now, my question to all of you is that, do you really know what death by hanging is all about? Is it just a concept? Is it just words? Or is it something that you feel with emotions? Or is it something that you think that it is something that needs logical discussion? I will try to go through this with you. Now, in any case, wherever there is a sentence of death, it has to go through various stages. One, of course, there must be the commission of the offense, which carries the death penalty. In other words, at the time the offense is committed, the sentence of death must be known. You can't have a case where you commit an offense and then later is decided that the sentence of death will apply. It is not prospective. It has to be existing at the time the offense is committed. Then, of course, there should be a proper investigation of the case. The person is charged. There's a trial. You go through the process of a trial, the conviction, and then the sentence. Now, in court, the most frequent sentences will be, for the less serious offense, will be fines, and a little more serious will be imprisonment. And there again, whether it's a short imprisonment or a long imprisonment, depending on the maximum that's allowed by law. And in fact, there is no minimum standards as far as sentences are concerned, unless, of course, it's spelled out by the law. And then for the more serious crimes, you have offenses of rape, where imprisonment is mandatory. And of course, we all know that in death, in murder, where a death has occurred, there's only one penalty, and that is the death sentence. Okay? Now, then I asked this question: why is the execution of the death penalty by hanging not carried out in public? Why are executions shrouded in secrecy? Now, to be an effective deterrent, shouldn't the death penalty be carried out in public and publicized? Is society being hypocritical? And if the death penalty is a successful deterrent, then logically there should be no further capital offenses being committed. I suppose after you have heard my questions raised here, you will know where my position is. To me, if you ask me for a short answer, is it a deterrent? My answer is no. But as I mentioned just now, I can't just say no without a basis, right? And I'll try to share this with you. Now, why I asked this question about publicity and so on. Those of you who are in favor of the death penalty, if you were asked, would you like to see a public hanging in the square? Dataran Merdeka, perhaps. You put up the gallows, and then you have an executioner come along and have an execution. I think all of us will be in abhorrence, isn't it? You say, oh my goodness, this is very uncivilized. It is inhuman. And what about human rights and so on? Yet, at the same time, those are the very same people who say, we must have the death penalty because if there's murder, a life has been taken, he must pay for it with his life. But execute him in prison, in private, where nobody can see this. Now, aren't we having double standards? Why is it that there must be secrecy in the execution? Why is it not carried in the papers at all? Once upon a time, I remember a long time ago, when marriages were advertised in the newspapers, at those days, in the early 60s and 70s, yes, there would be short articles in a Malay Mail, perhaps, which says, you know, so-and-so has been executed for this offense and so on. But these days, you don't even read about this. I suppose we've got bigger things to think about, 1 MDB, no less. But executions go by unnoticed, unless, of course, there is a big cry for clemency and so on, much like the one in Singapore that was just executed on the 26th. But in Malaysia, I think we are slightly different from Singapore. We are a little more civilized. I don't know. It is entirely your call of judgment. But to say that, you know, we shouldn't publicize this, but if it is held within the prison walls, well, serves him right. Now, I would like to ask you to reconsider this position. And you'll see here, it talks about a personal account. I want to share this with you, and then you'll tell me whether it is just emotional arguments or is it something which is fact-based and something which has got logical support. I was a magistrate a long time ago, much like Dr. Jagjit, many, many years ago. And do you know, as a magistrate, we not only have to visit prisons, we also have to witness executions. It is not a must, but there is a roster. Again, this is all unknown to the public because nobody wants to talk about these things. These are all, you know, inhuman things. But it happens, right? So let us not be the proverbial ostrich with a head in the sand. Because as a magistrate, this was way back in 1973, my turn came up and I was called to witness a hanging in Pudu prison. Even now, Pudu is no more there. At the crack of dawn, I remember knocking, using that brass doorknob, knocking on the green doors. Remember the very big green doors? They won't open the whole door for you, but just a little opening within the doors. And I went in there, met the governor of the prison, and I met the doctor. Two people must witness a hanging, a magistrate and a doctor. And that morning, what happened was that there were two boys. These were brothers, 19 years old and 21 years old. So obviously they were to be sentenced to death, and the death penalty was to be carried out because they were above 18. And what happened was that these boys had attempted to rob a policeman of his revolver somewhere in Chowkit. Struggle ensued, the gun went off, the policeman was killed. And both were convicted of murder and sentenced to death. So as a young rookie magistrate, fresh out from university, they say, look, menurut perintah, you have to go lah, you know. And then, to my horror, we were taken down the death row, which is bilik akhir. Now, the moment a person is convicted of a capital offense and the death sentence is passed, he is no longer grouped together with other prisoners. He is separated and he is in death row. That's what it is. They are there waiting to be executed. And they're all along this death row. I recall there were about 6 cells on the left, 6 cells on the right, a passageway in the middle. And of course, early in the morning, all the inmates were wide awake. And as we approached a cell, there was the mufti or the imam was there to say prayers with the 2 boys. And they were then very quickly taken out of the cell. The moment they are brought out, their hands are cuffed behind the back, and a white hood is put over their head, not a black hood. And they are marched to the gallows, which is a room next door to the cell. The moment they stand on the trap door, now the best way to describe this is that this is the ground floor. If you have a trap door above you, this room is completely empty, and a trap door that opens up this way, right? And above the trap door, you have a metal frame, a very strong metal beam, with 3 squares right in the middle of the trap door. That means you can take 3 executions at one time. 3 persons can be hung at the same time. And these 2 boys were marched to the 2 squares. The moment they are standing there, one warder will put a rope around his neck, another warder will be tying, cuffing his legs. Very, very fast, with less than a minute. And everybody steps back, and the executioner pulls the lever, and the trapdoor opens, and that is the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life. Because I saw 2 guys walking out alive, and then suddenly they are dropping. Besides the bang, total silence. Of course, not a whimper from them, and nobody said a word. After that, when I stepped back, I noticed there was a chart behind the executioner. I had a look. And you know what that chart was? What it says? The weight of the person, and there's a formula for the length of drop of the rope. Because if the rope is too short, he will strangulate and struggle. And if it is too long, he'll probably yank his whole head off. But that one was a, well, good execution in the sense that we are told that within seconds he loses consciousness, but he doesn't immediately die because there's still oxygen running in the body, and that will take a few more seconds to happen. Now you would think that the body is taken down immediately. No, the bodies were left hanging for half an hour. In the meantime, the governor then says, "Let's go to Jom, pergi pejabat minum kopi." I say, my goodness. I say, hey, look. Being a young rookie person, and I just witnessed 2 guys being killed, nothing short of being killed, and here's a guy says, come and drink coffee. And the whole idea was that to have the bodies remain hanging. And oh, well, I'm taking too long to tell the story. But anyway, after 15 minutes, after half an hour, the bodies were taken down. The doctor signed off and said he was medically dead. And I had to sign off to say that it was carried out lawfully. All right? So that is all about what hanging out. So it may be emotional, but think about it. Was it ever known to the press? Was it ever known to the public? Nothing. Okay? So what good is it to say that it will serve as a deterrent when there's no information to the public for them to make a concerted decision? Next, please. Now, we have a history of capital punishment in Malaysia. I won't spend much time on this. Just to say, in 2007, we had a application for a moratorium on the application of death penalty, and this was discussed at the UN General Assembly. And, but Malaysia voted against this, and you can see that 08, 10, 12, 14, and 16. And again, it was reviewed in October 2012. Next. And this was again reviewed by United Nations Human Rights Council in 2009 and 2013. Now, I won't spend too much time on this, but you can most certainly look at it. The current status of capital punishment, I already mentioned about GE 14 and what the Prime Minister has said and also what Tan Sri Muhyiddin had said immediately after the elections. We are expecting a bill to be passed in Parliament where the death penalty is to be abolished across the board, not just for limited offences. But as you may know, there has already been an amendment but it's a limited amendment where it is an abolition of the death penalty for drug trafficking, where there is a certificate by the public prosecutor to say that the accused had cooperated with the authorities to disrupt the drug supply, and that he has mitigated well and so on, and then he gets a chance to be punished with life imprisonment instead. Next, please. Right, I've already gone through I mentioned about the 14 sentences. These are mandatory, and of course the most common, as you know, will be murder, dangerous drugs, and so on. And the discretionary one, again, these are for abetments and so on. And also take note of the last one. Offense of contamination of water. Do you know that this act has been around since 2006? If you contaminate water and it affects the public, under the Water Services Industry Act, it can carry a death penalty. So please, gentlemen, the next time you want to ease yourself, don't do it near a water catchment. All right? You are getting more trouble than you asked for. Now, what about statistics? More stats. According to the police, from 2014 to 2017, a total of 702,319 individuals were detained for trafficking. Humongous number. So, if you think the death penalty works, why is this number growing? Secondly, you have, during the same period, 21,371 under 39B, and according to the Prisons Department, as at February 2017, a total of 799 prisoners were incarcerated in death row. Now, in the example that I mentioned, you know, it's not only what happened to the two boys, but all the other inmates in death row most certainly could have heard the loud bang when the trap doors opened. From the human rights perspective, the death penalty has been described as cruel, inhuman, and degrading. Can you just imagine the kind of fear, the kind of tension, the kind of anxiety that would be in the mind of the other inmates waiting for their turn? Is that the way that we treat fellow human beings? Now, next, the law and us. This is a pitch from my Human Rights Commission, and that is, as everybody knows, right, the right to life is the most fundamental of all human rights, and this is declared under the UDHR. It's under Article 6.2 of the ICCPR, which is the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and of course under our own federal constitution, Article 5.1. Next, please. Okay, a quick word about criminology and principles of sentencing. I did say just now, for us to fully understand what it's all about, you have to have a general idea. And this comes under criminology. And you see the Dutching here. Sorry, it's unlike, sorry, it's, I can't help but say that Dutching is not level. So, justice doesn't seem to be quite level. Much like the BN Dutching, I suppose. But it's not meant to be like this. It's a Freudian slip. It's supposed to be level. Now, the principles of sentencing, very quickly. These are some big words, but I'm sure you can look it up. Parsimony, proportionality, parity, totality, just punishment, deterrence. That's an important one. To deter the offender, which is specific deterrence, or other people, general deterrence, from committing offenses of the same or a similar nature. Rehabilitation. Now you have an execution, there's absolutely no rehabilitation for the accused, right? Denunciation, community protection, prevention, and retribution. Retribution will be, as in the flyer says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? If that's the case, and I'm sure, I don't know where it comes, does it come from the Bible, Reverend Fathers? I'm not sure. But it's been said, if you have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you know what's going to happen. The whole world will be blind and toothless. So, we have to be a little more compassionate in our ways. Next, causes of crime and prevention. Now this, I think all of us are very aware of this. Socio-economic reasons, I do not say for a moment, I'm only using this as an example. It doesn't mean to say the poor will end up stealing and end up having crimes of violence. It's not. It's just but an example. Next. You have different perspectives. Now, what are the reasons for the abolition of the death penalty? One is to reduce psychological trauma on family members going through appeal, pardons board, and execution queue. Nowadays, with the new, what do you call the new procedure in the criminal courts, you can have a trial within a year of the commission of the offense, appeals within another year in the court of appeal, and then perhaps another 6 months to 9 months in the federal court. All in, a trial would take about 3 years. Then there's after conviction. Of course, if he's acquitted, that's the end of the matter, he gets out. But if there's a conviction, then there comes the waiting for pardon, right? And that is where, that is the time when it's the most difficult, I would think, because you're just waiting your turn, not knowing whether or not you will be pardoned. There will be zero risk of executing an innocent person. And don't forget, while we all try to say that we have a good judicial system, accidents can happen, mistakes can be made, and there can be human errors. Okay? The death penalty is irreversible and irreparable, and it is to me, it is an ineffective deterrence. Okay? And obviously, the death penalty makes no allowance for repentance, remorse, or rehab. Human rights perspective. Can I just take a few more minutes, if I may? Human rights perspective. The right to life is a constitutional and fundamental human right, and the death penalty is a violation of individual right to life and security. And as mentioned just now, the death penalty is cruel, inhuman, and degrading. And many human rights defenders, including the Bar Council, and I see many members of the Bar here, they have advocated for the total abolition of the death penalty since '86, and by Suhakam and NGOs since 2011. Next, public opinion. Yes. Now, there was a very interesting survey carried out by Professor Roger Hood. And in short, what he says is that when a survey was carried out, it appeared that almost 9 out of 10 supported a death penalty. But when asked to say what sentences they would themselves impose on a series of examples, all of the persons who took part in the survey subject to a mandatory, cases which were subject to mandatory death sentence, a large gap was found between the level of support in theory and the level of support when faced with reality. So people have different ideas. When you ask them on paper, do you support? Yes. But when you explain to them and talk about the realities of the execution, they change their minds. Religious perspectives, I won't dare to go into this because experts will be talking about this, but we have the Islamic perspective, the Buddhist perspective, Christian perspective, Hindu, and the Taoist perspective. It's available if you like to look at it. So to conclude, time is running. The death penalty is not a deterrent, okay? And there are other ways. There are other psychological, social, and legal mechanisms that can work to prevent individuals from committing crimes. I think what we should be spending our time and energy is to prevent crimes happening and to make sure that those who have fallen by the way are rehabilitated and given another chance. Importantly, ladies and gentlemen, there is no empirical proof or data that irrefutably establishes that the death penalty is effective as compared to other forms of punishment in deterring heinous and serious crimes. The mandatory death penalty has obviously not had the desired effect intended by Parliament. So what's the way forward? Now the way forward, of course, is that organizations such as the Catholic Lawyers Society, other NGOs and so on have been very active of late, especially pushing for the amendments to the law. And this would need, any amendments to abolish the death penalty would need a 2/3 majority right? So the government being what it is, you've got a simple majority. We will not be able to push this through unless the opposition comes over to support this. And, well, I think perhaps there will be sufficient numbers. Now, on this, Suhakam, together with the Asia-Pacific Forum project, organized a national conference on the 28th of June, very recently, and a lot of ideas were exchanged, and the end result was that there was support for an abolition. Secondly, the IRC, something that Dr. Joy mentioned, of which I was a member after it will be appointed by the CEP. Death penalty was one of the considerations, and this is also in the report. But I can't tell you what that recommendation is because the government has not decided to make that report public yet. Hopefully it will. And on the 30th and 31st, there will be a seminar held in Parliament, and I think or those of you who are interested can attend. This is a Parliamentarians for Global Action. This is a group of parliamentarians within the Commonwealth working with the Malaysian MPs to push this agenda forward. And then in November, there will be an UPR, which is a Universal Periodic Review of the position of Malaysia's stand. And last but not least would be, if the death penalty is abolished, what happens? Of course, the person doesn't get out free. You don't set him free. There should be commutation of the death penalty to life imprisonment. Then two questions will arise. One is, how many years will he serve? Now, I think you have read in the papers, some have said, oh, minimum 30 years. What does that mean? Because life imprisonment under the penal code means 30 years. Once upon a time, it was 20. But then it was amended a couple of years ago. In fact, it was amended without much public debate, where life imprisonment means 30 years. So if you say commute from death to life imprisonment, minimum 30 years, gosh, that will be more than 30, and perhaps the rest of his natural life. In fact, the only offense that carries life imprisonment for the length of his natural life is under the Firearms Increased Penalties Act. That's the only act that provides for natural life, until natural death in prison. So if it is 30 years, I would think that it should be 30 and not minimum 30. That's one issue. Then the next issue to be considered is with effect from when? Because if you say with effect from the date of commutation, he may have served 5 years, 6 years waiting, which means another 30 years. Or should it be retrospective from the date of conviction? These are issues which have not been seriously debated, neither have any decisions been made. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know I really run out of my time. Thank you for listening. I will ask you the same question afterwards. Do you still think that death penalty should be maintained and whether it will work as a deterrent? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato' Ma. Yes, overrun by a couple of minutes, but it was an interesting session, especially what happens behind closed doors. Right, Dato' Ma has given us a few the provisions of the laws that actually imposes a death penalty, whether mandatory or discretionary. You've got 32 offenses that carries the death penalty in Malaysia in 8 legislations. One of them is contaminated water, as he's mentioned. There are others that's called the Strategic Trade Act, which is where you are dealing with weapons of mass destruction, for example. Then there's also those dangerous drugs and so forth. I will not go into details of all that because the next speaker is going to go into more details and all that. Now, I will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jagjit Singh. Dr. Jagjit is a lawyer by profession. He's graduated from the University of London in 1981, had his certificate in legal practice in 1986, did his Masters of Law at King's College, University of London in 1996. He was called to the Malaysian Bar in 2001, and he served 30 years. Is that a death sentence? So life imprisonment? 30 years. Life in prison, sorry, I shouldn't say that. He's been in the judicial and legal service for 30 years, commencing as a magistrate in Bintulu, interestingly enough, right up to various divisions in the government services. He's a deputy treasury solicitor in the, and also the legal advisor to the Ministry of Health. He's been a senior assistant in parliamentary draftsman, and his final posting was a sessions court judge. He's written 2 law books, Practical Approach to Enforcement and Intellectual Property Rights, and Civil Trial Guide books. The books were written, and not out of any income to be derived from that, but the proceeds and the royalties were actually donated and channeled to the St. Teresa's Orphanage Home in Kota Maruda in Sabah. So he's been around and as a practitioner on the judicial legal service side, meaning as a DPP prosecuting cases which carries the death penalty. He also is now on this side of the fence defending them. So you've got a good balance of experience and exposure here. So without much ado, can you put your hands and invite Dr. Jakji? Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My fellow speakers, thank you, Dr. Joy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed very, very thankful that Datuk Ma is here with us this evening. It makes my job much easier. In fact, he has done 3/4 of my job. Yeah. Now, Datuk Ma, allow me to take you back 25 years ago when you were a young defense counsel driving around a flashy sports car and I was a young and overzealous DPP. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know him? That's the latest killing by a state. Yeah? Okay, next. Now, Datuk Ma, you remember that man 25 years ago? Yeah. You were defending an accused. You have changed colors, the turban is white, but your beard is now white. Yeah. Now, you were defending an accused who was charged for 39B offense, and I was the DPP then, handling the case, prosecuting the case, and the offense carried a death penalty. Now, 20 years later, Datuk Ma, you were elevated as a judge of the Court of Appeal, and almost every week, there were 39B cases, drug trafficking cases carrying death penalty, murder cases carrying death penalty before the Court of Appeal, almost every week. Now, even though drug trafficking and murder carries a mandatory death penalty, it did not deter drug trafficking or murder. You agree with me, Datuk Ma? I rest my case. But never mind, allow me to complete my story with Datuk Ma. Right. I believe you still remember that particular case that we did together at the High Court, Kuala Lumpur High Court, before Justice Nick Hashim. Now, in the witness box was a very senior police officer, an ASP, Superintendent of Police, raiding officer, who had testified that upon arrest, he had administered a caution, and the suspect confessed to trafficking drugs. And it was in the police report. My case was watertight, you know, and that accused would have been sentenced to death, not for Datuk Ma. Now, after I sat down, Dato' Mah stood up and began his cross-examination of the senior police officer, ASP. First question, officer, please read out the caution. An officer replied, I don't remember the exact words, but I have a piece of paper. Now, Dato' Mah questioned, officer, can you produce the paper? And the ASP took out his wallet, and from his wallet, he produced a piece of paper that was stuck onto a telephone card. And of course, Dato' Mah went to him, took the paper, looked, turned here, turned there. I was observing him. What was he trying to do? Dato' Mah comments his cross-examination. He says, officer, I put So this was Dato' Mah's cross-examination. I put it to you, officer, you did not read the caution to the suspect. Officer disagreed. I put it to you that this paper was not in existence at the time of the arrest of the accused person. Of course, the ASP disagreed. I put it to you that the card on which the caution paper is pasted did not exist at the time of arrest. And the officer said, I disagree. Now, Dato' Mah then said, officer, peel off the paper from the card. And true enough, after peeling off the paper from the card, the telephone card was that of a World Cup football telephone card, which had not happened yet, which had not existed at the time of arrest. Mr. Mah, Dato' Mah is here. And ladies and gentlemen, can we place our lives, our children's lives, our relatives, our friends on such senior, so-called committed, dedicated police officers, raiding enforcement officers? Not for Dato' Mah, another innocent life would have been lost. Okay. Now that's Dato' Mah 25 years ago. Yeah, Karpal and Guben. Okay, as I said earlier, my job has been made much easier. Dato' Mah has gone through the offences which carries the death penalty. The most common ones that carry the death penalty are murder, drug trafficking, firearms offences, as well treason, waging war against the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Now, there are also other offences, a whole lot of other offences, 17, 18 of them, and you can read them. I'll leave my slides behind. You can go through them, all the 17, 18 offences, which carries the death penalty. Some are mandatory, some are optional. Optional in the sense it carries death penalty and or life imprisonment. Now, next. Okay, next. Okay, now, the procedure. In fact, Datuk Ma has also gone through the procedure, cases involving death penalty. Only high courts, only high courts hear death penalty cases. Only high courts have got jurisdiction over over death penalty cases. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know that there's no jury trial in Malaysia. Okay? It was abolished in 1982. Now, and High Court judge sits alone to hear capital punishment offences. Death penalty offences are not bailable. So until the trial is over, the suspect or the accused are kept under remand. So if the case takes 3 years, the poor guy is under remand. If it takes 5 years, the person is under remand. And if he's acquitted, he would have served a good part of his life under remand. Okay. Now, appeals from the High Court goes up to Court of Appeal. That's where Datuk Ma was. And on towards Federal Court. Appeals are automatic. Yeah? And when someone is sentenced to death, the head of state receives a report on such case, and the head of state can either commute the sentence or order another punishment or pardon the offender. Now, next. Now, Section 277 of the Criminal Procedure Code, it says that death sentences in Malaysia are carried out by hanging. Other states, other countries, it could be by lethal injection or by electric chair, but in Malaysia, the law is very clear. It says that death sentences to be carried out by hanging. Okay, next. Exceptions. Datuk Ma has also explained the 3 exceptions. One is a pregnant woman at the time of sentencing. Yeah? Pregnant woman at the time of sentencing. Second category are minors under the age of 18. And the third category are mentally unsound persons. Now, for a pregnant woman, death penalty sentence is converted into life imprisonment. Whereas for a juvenile offender, he is detained at the pleasure of the ruler. Okay, next. Okay, that's purposes of sentencing. Datuk Ma has given you all the whole list of criminology on sentencing. But very briefly, there are 4 aims of sentencing, which are deterrent. Sentences imposed should be deterrent, should serve as a rehabilitation, serves as prevention of crimes, and retribution. Now, for capital punishment offences, okay, only 2 are applicable, are relevant, that is retribution, that is eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or life for a life. Okay, that's retribution. Okay, now, and of course, deterrent. Deterrence, there are 2 aspects. One is deter the person who committed the offense. In this case, if there's a death penalty, there's no deterrence, no self-deterrence. The person would be dead. Of course, deterrence to the general public, yes. Now, it would be deterrence if there's sufficient publicity. But in most cases, death penalty offences are carried out in secrecy. In fact, that's one of the complaints by Amnesty, that why are death penalty executions carried out in secrecy? Okay. Now, next. Now, again, the principles of retribution and deterrence. Okay, next. Yeah, there's a High Court decision which says that retribution as an object in sentencing is now said to play no part. And the courts have since progressed from an eye to an eye type of justice to exact from victims of aggression their pound of flesh. So this aims of sentencing or jurisprudence of sentencing relating to retribution is slowly dying off. Yeah. Okay. Next. Now, statistics. I think Dato' Ma has given you all the statistics, but this is from the Prisons Department. As of October 15, 2018, we have got 1,267 prisoners facing death penalty, and out of which 900 are convicted for drug trafficking, 39B drug trafficking offenses. Now, from 2007 to 2017, 35 persons have actually been executed. Okay. Now, and of course, October 2018, Law Minister has announced that death penalty will be abolished, and the bill for abolishment of death penalty will be introduced soon, tabled this current session, and all executions are temporarily stopped. Okay, next. So, does death penalty deter crime? Okay. Now, there's no evidence or data to confirm that death penalty served as an effective deterrent to prevent crime. In fact, there has been no significant reduction in the crimes for which the death penalty is currently mandatory, particularly in murder, drug trafficking offenses. Yes, next. Okay, I'm sure you all are familiar with these cases. The case of Botak Chin, charged for murder, firearms. The case of Mona Fendi, and of course, Al Maona case. Now, these were all offenses carrying the death penalty. They have been executed. And despite execution, did it serve as a deterrent? The answer is no. Okay. Yeah, we still have Al Tantuya. Yeah. So clearly, where's the deterrence? Okay. Next. There's no evidence that executions deter criminals. In fact, next. United Nations General Assembly Resolution 65 of 206, it says that there is no conclusive evidence of the deterrent value of the death penalty. That's the finding at United Nations. Right, next. Now, studies have also shown that many victims, victims here refer to the families of the deceased, denounce the use of death penalty. Using execution to try to right the wrong of their loss only causes more pain and suffering. Yeah? This comes from the victim's family. Yeah? So, for example, this is a case in the US. Bud Welch's daughter, Julie, was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Although the first reaction of the father was to wish that those who committed this terrible crime be killed. But he ultimately realized that such killing would amount to vengeance, and it was vengeance that killed Julie. Vengeance is a strong and natural emotion. It has no place in justice system. So we have to remove this element of emotion, element of vengeance. Yeah. Okay. Next. Now, of course, we have come across this case of Chi Gaik Yap's case, Alustar, where young girl, 25 years old girl, was raped and murdered, and the accused Sharil Jaafar was charged for murder, and he was acquitted. at the close of prosecution's case, no prima facie case, and the father of this little girl tried to jump down the building, Alustar High Court building, and I mean, this resulted from emotions. Yeah, we do realize that there are such cases as well, but however, federal court rectified the situation, and Sharil was, at the end of the day, found guilty and sentenced to death. Right, next. Yeah, of course, there's also public outcry in earlier case, Kenny Ong's case. I'm sure you all still remember that case, where she was murdered, raped, murdered, and the body dumped in a manhole and set on fire. Very cruel, very brutal. Yeah, and of course, in this case also, the accused was sentenced to death. Next. And of course, we are also fully aware of public opinion. Now, again, public opinion is neither here nor there. Because what sort of public opinion is carried out? Is it a considered public opinion where public is made aware of the situations, why we are seeking public opinion and the facts, you know? Right, next. Now, of course, crime in Malaysia is on the rise, with or without death penalty. Right, next. And you see, in 1973, we have 40 over 1,000 cases, and 2003, there was a huge increase. There was 230% increase in crime. Right, okay. Now, because of this huge increase in crime, next. Of course, these were the crimes, offenses committed, violent crime. Right, next. Okay, in 2004, a special select committee was established to look into penal code offenses and the criminal procedure code. Right, next. Now, this is where members of the select committee were appointed from both sides, government as well as opposition, and your famous YB Teresa Kok was also a member of that committee, and that's why I'm here today, thanks to her. Yeah. Okay, that's the chairman of the select committee. I was an advisor to that select committee. Yeah, that's why I'm involved in that. All right, next. And this special select committee went around the whole country, north, south, east, west, Sabah, Sarawak, and gathered opinions, views from the public. And we came up with a select committee's report, yeah, which was tabled in Dewan Rakyat. Now, next. Now, I'm sorry I have to rush because I've been given a signal. Yeah, okay. Now, part of the outcome of this special select committee was 3 new offenses were introduced. Terrorism offenses, rape cum murder offenses, child rapists. Now, this special select committee, taking into account that judges were reluctant to impose mandatory death sentence. So what they did was, for all these offenses, even though very serious offenses, terrorism, rape, cum murder, child rapists, there was an option given to judges. You have death penalty as well as life imprisonment, 30 years. Yeah? So this was a starting point where we started looking into our laws, that we were moving away from mandatory death sentence. Okay, right, next. Okay, so does death penalty deter crime? Datuk Mah has spoken on it with his Suhakam details and statistics. Next. Of course, there's an outcry now. Many political leaders have also expressed dissatisfaction with the situation, in the sense that death penalty is ultimate, cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment. Next. Okay. Now, I bring you to Shah Alam High Court. Okay. Now, Shah Alam High Court is just one example I have taken in my presentation. Now, number of high courts that were hearing death penalty cases 10 years ago were only 3 criminal high courts. There were only 3 criminal high courts in Shah Alam 10 years ago. But today, we have got 8 high courts specially designated to hear capital punishment cases in Shah Alam. And of course, number of death penalty offences have also increased by more than 100% over the last 10 years. So, in other words, death sentence has not deterred, okay, has not deterred death penalty offences. On the other hand, it's on the rise. Okay, okay, can move on to. So we have Article 5, which Datuk Ma touched on just now. Right to life. Every individual has inherent right to life. The right to life is a fundamental right which must be absolute, inalienable, universal, irrespective of crime committed by the accused person. Next. Okay. Now, we have for drug trafficking offences, a lot of reliance is placed on presumption. Okay. Now, the burden in drug trafficking offences shifts to the accused. Yeah. Okay. Next. Now, for cannabis, I'll just give you one example. For cannabis, the law is if you have 200 grams or more, it is presumed that you are trafficking, even though you did not carry out any buying, selling, distribution, or it may be for your own consumption. But the law says 200 grams and above presume drug trafficking. Now, what about 199.9? That's not drug trafficking. Now, who determines this figure? 200 grams is man-made. Yeah? How did we come to this figure of 200? And mind you, if it is 200 or 201 even, it carries a death penalty. Okay? So you have 199.9, okay, it's possession, is all right. No death penalty. But moment you touch 200, it carries a death penalty. Okay? All right, next. Okay. Now, why death penalty should be abolished? Judges inclined to acquit accused instead of imposing mandatory death sentence. Judges inclined to impose custodial sentences instead of death sentence. Right, next. Okay, this is a case in Sabah, which 2 months back, I was there. Now, federal court acquitted the accused just because the High Court had used the word about. Yeah? About 235 grams. Just the word about. Because of the word about, both the accused persons who were convicted, sentenced to death, they were acquitted. You see how judges, find ways to get away from death penalty offense sentences. Okay, I know time is just 2 minutes. Okay, now what is more important is, you see, innocent persons may be condemned to death, and execution of death penalty is irreversible. Right. Next. Okay. Okay. Now, the risk of executing innocent persons, ladies and gentlemen, this is very serious. You have to bear in mind, do we have honest, trustworthy, responsible, credible enforcement, investigation, and prosecution officers? Ask Datuk Ma. I was an overzealous and very egoistic DPP. Yes, I have to answer if I lose any case, be it a death penalty case. Yeah. Now, we have KPIs to achieve. Yeah, KPIs to achieve. And we have overzealous officers. And those who handle drug trafficking cases would be very familiar with this famous standard police report. Okay? Acting on information, we approached the accused, and what happened? Lihat dalam genggaman tangan kanan suspek ada dadah. That is standard. It's not the left hand, it's always the right hand. And the word used is genggaman tangan kanan suspect. Make a study of all the police reports involving drug offences. You'll come across this famous phrase. How do they get that? Did they actually found the drugs on genggaman tangan kanan? Okay, and if we have what we call striking deals, if the deal goes right, and in court the genggaman tangan kanan becomes tangan kiri. Yeah, so it moves. Okay, now ladies and gentlemen, can we put our lives, yeah, on these questionable, uncredible officers? There could be mistakes, genuine mistakes. Okay. Now we have, of course, overzealous. Now, okay. Next one. This is also a case which I defended. I'm now a defense counsel. Okay. Now, this is a case where two young sisters, 19 and 21 years old, were sleeping in a house. The whole family had gone fishing. One of the brothers was a drug addict. Now, police came, raided the house at 3 o'clock in the morning. Only these two girls were sleeping. And, of course, they were arrested, charged for 39B, drug offense. Okay. And the evidence was the sergeant went at the back of the house and saw one of the girls putting a package of drugs, suspected to be drugs, in the refrigerator. That's the refrigerator there in the picture. Okay, next. Fortunately for them, immediately they called. The father called me up. He says, sir, they have taken our girls, arrested and so on. Can you come and help? Now the father was a bus driver. We grew up together, JKR Barracks in Johor Bahru. Okay, so I rushed down to Johor Bahru and my habit, I take photographs to see, to preserve this one. And I took photographs of the window. And there were curtains on the window. Now, next. If you go at the back, it was night. You go at the back, this was the scene. Can you see anything through the windows? No. And that's the evidence given. I saw, sergeant giving evidence. I saw the girl running, placing the package in the refrigerator. How can you see through the window which has got a curtain? Yeah, and on this point, the case was acquitted. But the two poor girls were remanded for 2 years. And conveniently, the brother was subsequently picked up and sent buang daerah in Cameron Highlands. Who wouldn't want to go to Cameron Highlands? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've got altogether, I had 61 slides. I think I've finished about 40. Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you. I have to stop.
Thank you, Dato' Jagjit, bringing and reminiscing old past cases and letting us know what's the real tragedy that happens behind it. Yeah, we now invite the next speaker. Invite the next speaker. Now, you would have thought that we've done away with all the lawyers on this side of the table. We've done the two judges, and they've completed their task, and myself on this end. I've got another lawyer as the next speaker as well. He's none other than Prematilaka Sri Sena, who holds an honours degree in law from a British university. He's completed his certificate in legal practice. Fortunately for the rest of us here on this side of the table, he did not practice. He has vast corporate experience in business development, strategic planning, and re-engineering. He's also a certified trainer in the field of corporate health and wellness. He serves as a vice president of the Sasana Abhibuddhi Vardhana Society, a Buddhist society, which was founded in 1894. He's the head of the society's Buddhist education division. He's currently the Honorary Treasurer General of the Malaysian Consultative Council of Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Sikhism, and Taoism. Prem had in the past served on the following committees: Committee for the Promotion of Harmony and Understanding Amongst Adherents, National Bioethics Committee, and Gagasan Bertindak, Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, can I invite you all to put your hands together and invite our speaker, Premla Tilakar.
Thank you, Joy. Wow. Distinguished speakers from the legal fraternity, I'm slightly associated with it. But Dato' Jagdit, don't forget, now we have the overzealous police officers who kill inmates in prison before even they come to trial. You know, they give the death sentence without the judges having to give them, yeah? All right. This is from the Buddhist perspective. Buddhism, as you all know, has a great influence in the history of Asia. Buddhist doctrines are still deeply rooted in people's minds, according to research conducted in Taiwan. Buddhist scriptures reflect a clear and strong attitude. Okay. A clear and strong attitude against the death penalty. Historically, Buddhist teachings have had a substantial impact on penalty policies in a number of countries. Given the current trend to abolish the death penalty promoted by international human rights groups, Buddhism can provide traditional thought and faith-based resources to urge those Asian countries where death penalty has not yet been abolished to reflect upon their use in this form of punishment. Interestingly, in terms of doctrine, the death penalty is clearly inconsistent with Buddhist teachings. Buddhists place great emphasis on nonviolence and compassion for life. The Buddha did not explicitly, if you could change, yeah, sorry, I forgot. The Buddha did not explicitly speak about capital punishment, but his teaching shows no sympathy for physical punishment, no matter how bad the crime. A logical starting point from which to begin considering a Buddhist perspective on death penalty would be Buddhism's most basic set of training rules for personal spiritual development, known as the Panchasila or 5 precepts. These basic rules of good conduct are for all Buddhists, lay or ordained. The precepts of Buddhism are not the Buddhist 10 commandments. They are more like training wheels. An enlightened being is said to always respond correctly to every situation. But for those who have not yet realized enlightenment, keeping the precepts is a training discipline that helps us live harmoniously with others while we learn to actualize the Buddhist teachings. Next. The first precept. The first precept is in Pali, Panatipata Veramani Sikha Padang Samadhiyami. I undertake the training rule to abstain from taking life. The word Pana refers to breathing or any living being that has breath and consciousness. This includes people and all animal life, including insects, but they do not include plant life. The word Atipata means striking down. This refers to killing or destroying. So as the slide shows, you know, you shouldn't even kill worms. Yeah? The root cause of Buddhist opposition to death penalty is the Buddhist principle of ahimsa. Can we have ahimsa? Which means no killing. An act of killing takes place under 3 conditions. First of all, the sought after targets of killing must have lives. Second, there has to be an attempt to seek to take someone's life. Third, an act of killing is carried out. Under these conditions, the crime of killing is committed, whether it is done by oneself or ordered by judges. You know, or, you know, and this, or ordered, accepted, encouraged, or praised by someone else. The next point would be to go into the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the path of enlightenment as taught by the Buddha. It is composed of 8 parts. No, I think he went too fast. Can you move back? The Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, this is into the right action. Right action or Sama Kamanta, the fourth pillar of the Noble Eightfold Path comes into play. Right action is part of the ethical conduct, proportion of the path along with right livelihood and right speech. These three spokes of the Dhamma will teach us to take care in our speech, our actions, and our daily lives to do no harm to others and to cultivate wholesomeness in ourselves. Right action means being accurate or skillful, as it carries a connotation of wise, wholesome, and ideal. It is right in the sense being upright, the way a ship rights itself when battered by a wave. It also describes something that is complete and coherent. The morality should not be taken as a commandment, as do this or you are wrong. The aspects of the path really are more like a physician's prescription rather than absolute rules. All right? This means that when we act rightly, we act without selfish attachment to our agendas. We act mindfully without causing discord with our speech. Our right actions spring from compassion and from understanding of the Dhamma. It means volition action. Thus we choose to do whether those choices are made consciously or subconsciously. Next, he abused me, he ill-treated me. The enmity of those harboring such thoughts cannot be appeased. I'll tell you a story. The story of Thera Tissa. While residing at the Jetavana monastery in India, the Buddha uttered verses 3 and 4. Tissa was the son of Buddha's maternal aunt, was at one time staying with the Buddha. He became a bhikkhu. A bhikkhu means become a monk, only at his old age. But he posed as a senior bhikkhu and was very pleased when visiting bhikkhus asked his permission to do some service for him. On the other hand, he failed to perform the duties expected of junior monks. Although he was old in age, but he was still a junior monk. And he would quarrel with the younger monks. Should anyone rebuke him on account of his behavior, he would go complaining to the Buddha, weeping very much dissatisfied and very upset. The others also followed him in the presence of the Buddha. The Buddha spoke this: he abused me, he ill-treated me, he got the better of me, he stole my belongings. The enmity of those harboring such thoughts cannot be appeased. Then he said, he abused me, he ill-treated me, he got the better of me, he stole my belongings. The enmity of those not harboring such thoughts can be appeased. So in the sense, what it says is that if you have a clear mind, irrespective of what people do to you, you will have a peace of mind, yeah? Then we have, hatred is never overcome with hatred. And this is the famous sayings of the Buddha. While residing at the Jetavana monastery again, the Buddha uttered these words: once there lived a householder whose wife was barren. Later he took another wife. The feud started when the elder wife caused abortion of the other, who eventually died in childbirth. In later existence of the two, because Buddhism believes in rebirth, in a later existence, the two were born as a hen and a cat. We have 31 planes of existence if you study the Buddhist theology, a doe and a leopardess. And finally, as the daughter of a nobleman in Savatthi and an ogress named Kali. Kali was in hot pursuit of the lady with the baby, when the later learned that the Buddha was nearby giving a religious discourse at the Jetavana monastery. She fled to him and placed a son at his feet for protection. Then the Buddha said, the ogress was stopped at the door by the guardian spirit of the monastery and was refused admission. The Buddha told them about their past feuds and rivals, wives of a common husband, as a cat and a hen, and as a doe as a leopardess. They were made to see the hatred could only cause more hatred, and that it could only cease through friendship, understanding, and goodwill. So hatred is indeed never appeased by hatred. in this world, it is appeased by loving kindness. My next slide will take you to this one. One should not beat or kill others. This again is the story. I'll tell you stories. I've got only 20 slides, enough time for stories. While residing at the Javana monastery, the Buddha uttered verse 1 to 9. Yeah? 17 bhikkhus were cleaning up a building at the Jetavana monastery complex with the intention of occupying it, when another group of comprising 6 bhikkhus arrived on the scene. The group of 6 said to the first group, "We are senior to you, so you had better give way to us. We will take this place." The group of 17 did not give in, so they beat up the other group who cried out in pain. The Buddha, learning about this, reprimanded them and laid down the disciplinary rule forbidding the monks, bhikkhus, the monks, to beat others. The Buddha said, "All are afraid of the stick, all fear death. Putting oneself in another's place, one should not beat or kill others." The next story, the story of the 6 monks again. After coming to blows the first time, the same 2 groups of bhikkhus quarreled again over the same building. As the rule prohibiting beating others had already been laid down, the group of 6 threatened the other group with upraised hands. The group of 17 who were junior to the other monks cried out in fright. The Buddha said, "All are afraid of the stick, all hold their lives dear, next slide please? Yeah, all hold their lives in dear. Putting oneself in another's place, one should not beat or kill others." The last story, the story of many youths. Next slide. Okay, if you harm others, you will not find happiness in your next existence. We're talking about rebirth, yeah? Once the Buddha was out on an alms round at Savatthi when he came across a number of youths beating a snake with sticks. Oh, that's not a snake, that's a dog. Yeah. When questioned, the youths answered that they were beating the snake because they were afraid that the snake might bite them. To them, the Buddha said, "If you do not want to be harmed, you should also not harm others. If you harm others, you will not find happiness in your next existence." Then the Buddha said, "He who seeks his own happiness," the next slide please. "He who seeks his own happiness by not oppressing others, who also desire to have happiness, will find happiness in their next existence." All right? This is not like 1 MDB and all the money, yeah? So in conclusion, the next slide, please. Okay. To conclude, what the Buddha said was, cultivate boundless love. Buddhism teaches practitioners to search for an end to suffering by divorcing ourselves from the world of greed, hatred, and delusion. Next slide. Basic tenets of the religion, including causing no harm and showing compassion and love towards living creatures. These philosophies extend to Buddhist views on punishment. So we talked about calling for meditation, loving kindness or meditation. Next slide. The Buddha advocates expressing mercy to others instead of wishing enemies or wrongdoers ill. When you do meditation, you've got to start with yourself. You cannot radiate love to others if you don't love yourself. You start by yourself. So start with yourself first. Next slide, please. And then you're wishing your enemies and wrongdoers well. You know, when you do your meditation, you need to bless everybody in the world, irrespective of whether they have hurt you or whether they have done. So it says, may all beings be peaceful. Yeah. The Buddhist meditation of loving kindness involves one stage in which people meditating, wishing love onto someone who they dislike. And that's difficult, isn't it? If you dislike your neighbor. And this is an interesting question. Somebody asked the Buddha, "Who is my neighbor?" And the Buddha said, "Your neighbor is houses 40 foot to the east, 40 houses to the west, 40 houses to the east, 40 houses to the north, and 40 houses to the south, which means to say your entire neighborhood, you know. So those are your neighbors, yeah. Next slide, please. We need to have rehabilitation, not retribution. Buddhism opposes any severe punishment, as Buddhists see it as an affront to both recipient and the person conducting the punishment. A person is incapable of delivering any extreme punishment with compassion, a trait all bodies must show to all living beings. The aim of punishment should not be retribution. Next slide, please. Wait, hold on. An eye for an eye, it should not be retribution. It should be rehabilitation. But in the most extreme cases, last slide, in the most extreme of cases, people can be banished from the town, like going to Cameron Highlands, yeah? Or the city, if no hope of rehabilitation is possible. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prem, for enlightening us on the Buddhist way of life and their position on this issue. Like I said just now, well, you think that we're completed with all the lawyers. We've not actually done yet. Our next speaker is also another lawyer, and he's none other than our own Reverend Father, Michael Chua. Reverend Father Michael Chua graduated from University of Malaya with an LLB honors. In 1991, he's called to the Malaysian bar and he's practiced as an advocate and solicitor. He entered the seminary at the College General in Penang and was ordained a Catholic priest in 2004. He's completed his postgraduate in Islamic studies at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, IIU. A Fulbright scholar who studied interfaith community action at the University of Michigan, USA. He was the parish priest of Our Lady of Lourdes in Klang and now the Church of Jesus Caritas in Kapong, as well as the administrator of the Chapel of Christus Saman in Taman Tun. He is also the ecclesiastical assistant and chaplain to the Catholic Lawyers Society and to the Catholic Ministry of the Deaf. He is the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Kuala Lumpur. For those of you who are from St. Thomas More's Church, you know what happened to the last Catholic Chancellor in England, right? He was sent to the gallows. He's previously involved in interreligious and ecumenical works. He's former executive committee member of the Christian Federation of Malaysia, or CFM, and the Malaysian Consultative Council of Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Sikhism, and Taoism. Acronym is Majlis. Without much ado, can we put our hands together and invite Reverend Father Michael Chua. Thank you.
Fellow distinguished speakers and the moderator and the guests who have come here for this talk. As I was sitting down there, I was just contemplating the advantage of being the last speaker. And you will be saying, is there an advantage to being the last speaker? Of course. By this time, most of you would be catatonic and would therefore not pay attention to all the flaws and the holes in the presentation. Yeah? It's also time for some of you to take a toilet break, and you can come back after 20 minutes. You know, when I was in the United States, a faculty colleague gave me this piece of advice in regards to the art of pitching a project. And he said, well, it's all in the packaging. It's all in the title. And you just have to come up with a saucy, scintillating, controversially sensational title to a lecture, and you will get the crowds. Of course, being seated next to such an extraordinary panel of distinguished speakers also helps. So I start with the first slide. It's a screenshot of this online article from Times Magazine, and it has this headline, which I would consider sensational. It says, the Pope changed the Catholic Church's position on the death penalty. Will the Supreme Court follow? Of course, this is referring to the United States. It's a reference to the changes made by Pope Francis recently
to one particular paragraph in our catechism, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. But more on this later. But now back to the headlines. Now to a non-Catholic or to an average lay person, there's nothing quite controversial about this headline, right? But for many Catholics, serious Catholics, and also for many other Christians, the headline and what it claims is indeed disturbing. The controversy isn't about the morality or the legitimacy of the death penalty, but about what the Pope can or cannot do. If he could, and he did change the teaching on the death penalty, would it then be contradicting Scripture and the Church's teaching? In order to answer this question, of course, you would need to know what Scripture says about this, on this position, and also the Church's position till now. So it's reasonable to begin our discussion by going back to the 10 Commandments, right? In particular to the 5th commandment. And I shall use the King James Version because it's, it always sounds better, in medieval English. Thou shalt not kill. And that seems clear enough, but the starting point of our discussion on the morality of killing does not begin in this negative injunction, but rather our starting point is a positive one. And we have to go back to the first book of the Bible, to the story of the creation of man. God creates man, but unlike other inanimate objects, he gives man this singular, this very special gift of life. Not just life which animates, because all flora and fauna also enjoys that, but he gives man an immortal soul. In a way, we can say God gives a part of his own divine eternal life seen in the action of breathing life into man. So we are not just stardust, as some poets and the song, if you're familiar with the song Woodstock, would claim. We are gifted with something divine. And this is what the Church calls the sanctity of the human life. Catholic Christians therefore believe that all human life is sacred from conception until natural death. And the taking of innocent human life, whether born or unborn, is morally wrong. In many ways, Western society has no problems with this with regards to the death penalty. But note here, the Church's consistent position with regards to both abortion and euthanasia. We have always opposed it, even against the current mainstream. The Church teaches human life is sacred because from its beginning it involves the creative action of God, and it remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator. So the beginning, and it continues, who is the sole end, and so therefore our ultimate destiny. God alone is the Lord of life from its beginning until its end, and no one can, under any circumstance, claim for himself the right directly to destroy an innocent human being, including yourself, right? That's called suicide. Since life is sacred, there is an absolute injunction against destroying the life of an innocent human being. Now, how is this enforceable? Because there's a law here, right? And as any lawyer would tell you, a law without penalties or effective enforcement would be just a toothless piece of legislation. Well, both the enforcer and the penalty incurred for taking the life of another is found in our scriptures. The enforcer, of course, is God or his authorized delegates. And the penalty for killing is death. Whoever sheds the blood of man by man, shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. If there is a deterrent statement, it would be this. God seems to ground the shedding of blood by man in the dignity of human life. Humanity created in the image of God is of such value that to murder is to bear the most awful consequences imaginable, the forfeiture of your own life. But it will also seem that there are other serious violations of God's commandments that would warrant the death penalty. And you can see it from here, Interestingly, it would include things like cursing your father and mother. So if there are children here, be warned. Human trafficking, something as recent, in recent times, a kind of a realization, was there in Scripture right from the very beginning. And we have other things today which may be considered normal in certain societies, including physical abuse of your parents, bestiality, adultery, homosexual intercourse. Now, but some would argue that, well, all these things are things of the past, right? They're from the Old Testament. We Christians, we are the people of the New Testament, and all this have been abrogated by Jesus Christ. But if you remember the Gospel of St. Matthew, he tells us that he did not come to abolish the old law, but to fulfill it. And the word fulfill here means that he did not come to lower the bar, but instead raised it. And be warned, it gets quite graphic here. For example, in the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord recalls the commandment, you shall not kill, thou shalt not kill. And then adds to it the prescription against anger, hatred, and vengeance. In other words, if in the past killing under the old law was murder, today harboring hatred, anger against your neighbor would also be considered murder. But Jesus and his apostles also forbade the church from exercising vengeance on anyone, and even from exercising judgment over others. Furthermore, he taught his disciples to make forgiveness a way of life. You can remember that. You need to forgive not just 7 times, 70 times, 7 times, as some translations will have it. And reconciliation should be a prerequisite for worship. In other words, before you lay your gift on the altar, go make friends with your neighbor. Yet again, he uses the imagery of what we would be likened today to the hudud punishment, cutting off an offending part of the body if it causes you to sin. Most people don't like to hear this part of it, but it's, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, all right? That would apply to anyone who watches pornography or something like that, right? Some scholars argued, of course, that this is a hyperbole and that it should not be taken literally. Rather, it should speak. The body is a symbol of the community. So it may mean the excommunication of a member of the community for the sake of the common good, for the good of the whole community. St. Thomas Aquinas in his theology would extend this to the death penalty. So at the moment of his own arrest, you remember, Jesus admonishes one of his own followers, an over-enthusiastic one, when he cut off the ear of a member of the arresting party with these words, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So this could be justification for both a pacifist position or even regarded as a scriptural basis for the death penalty. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Again, in Romans 13, right after St. Paul had called Christians away from vengeance, Paul speaks of the Roman state, the government, bearing the sword against evildoers by God's authority. And of course, you remember the story in the Gospel of Luke, the repentant thief on the cross. In his repentance, he recognizes that his actions deserved the punishment he was receiving. He deserved the death penalty, whereas Jesus did not deserve it because he was innocent, and therefore that sentence was unjust. So if you take in this whole cursory reading of these passages, it may lead to 2 different positions, 2 different threads. But that's, in our Catholic way of trying to explain things, we often speak of these things not in contradiction, but they're in an analogous way, they are somehow in tandem. The first one is capital punishment is permissible and sometimes even necessary because it is authorized by God himself for the protection of inviolable rights and the common good of the community. First one. Second, mercy and forgiveness should be offered to the offender, who is always to be given an opportunity to repent. All right? Now, how has the Catholic Church interpreted these varied texts? In his book, The City of God, St. Augustine in the 5th century wrote about the state administers justice under divine conscension, under divine authority. Since the agent of authority is but a sword in the hand and is not responsible for the killing, it is no way contrary to the commandment, thou shalt not kill. So that includes the judge who sentenced the person to death, or the executioner at the prison who pulls the lever and the rope or the trap door opens and the man falls down, they are not guilty of that because the state is not a person and therefore he cannot kill. Later in the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas argued that you can sacrifice a body part of the whole body. It's like amputation. If gangrene has struck a certain part of your body and you need to get rid of it in order for the person to survive for the good of the community, so therefore you can sacrifice a criminal for the sake of the community. It's what we call the common good argument. Quoting Aquinas and applying the double effect principle in self-defense, and the explanation for the double effect principle is found in this particular passage. The Catechism states, the legitimate defense of persons and societies is not an exception. It is not an exception to the prohibition against the murder of the innocent that constitutes intentional killing. The art of self-defense can have a double effect: the preservation of one's own life, that which is intended, and the killing of the aggressor, which is not intended. In order to save yourself or to save someone else, you did not intend the killing of that person, but it may happen. Following this, the Catechism continues to teach, legitimate defense can be not only a right, but also a grave duty. You know, whenever we speak of duty, there is an obligation. A grave duty for one who is responsible for the life of others. In this case, referring to the state and other authorities given this right. Then it affirms the right of and duty of the state to take the necessary steps to preserve public order and protect the community. So we look at this paragraph 2266. The efforts of the state to curb the spread of behavior harmful to people's rights and to the basic rules of civil society correspond to the requirement of safeguarding the common good. Remember the word common good? The community. Legitimate public authority has the right and duty to inflict punishment proportionate to the gravity of the offense. And we heard about proportionalism in terms of the presentation by our first two speakers. Punishment has the primary aim of redressing the disorder introduced by the offense. When it is willingly accepted by the guilty party, it assumes the value of expiation. In other words, it washes away, it takes away the effects of that sin. Punishment then, in addition to defending public order and protecting people's safety, has a medicinal purpose. As far as possible, it must contribute to the correction of the guilty party. Note here, there is no mention of retribution. It is good to note that none of the paragraphs that I've just presented reflect past teachings of theologians, as well as the position of the church found in many other documents and teachings of popes and bishops. None of these things have been amended or revised by Pope Francis, at least in his latest initiative. So think of it in this way. The morality of capital punishment, or for that matter, a just war, follows the same principle as the morality of just self-defense. There's the double effect principle involved, as well as the common good. And from the above, we can see that the church has always taught clearly and consistently that the death penalty is in principle consistent with both natural law and the gospel. And when we have a whole set of catechisms promulgated by various popes, right until the time of John Paul, St. John Paul II, although St. John Paul II himself was quite reluctant and hesitant to call for a practice to push for capital punishment. In fact, he was deeply opposed to it because of his theology of the body and his theology of life, wishing to promote the culture of life. Finally, we now turn to the recent amendment, to the controversial, this controversial amendment, you may say, to paragraph 2267 of the Catechism. It's good to note that this is not the first amendment. If some people are jumping up and down and say, how can a pope change the Catechism? It's written in stone. It is not written in stone. The Catechisms have been promulgated at different times with different wording, and even during the pontificate of Pope St. John Paul II, who promulgated the Catechism in 1992, he made major changes in 1997, not just to this paragraph, but to many other paragraphs. Of course, we didn't have, not many people had access to internet, and the blogosphere wasn't as active as it is today. So you don't have pitchfork and torches. So it was not the first time. This is the second time. And Pope St. John Paul himself made changes to this paragraph, wishing to emphasize the protection of human life. And he also wanted to sow skepticism against the death penalty. He himself was an outspoken in his opposition to the capital punishment. In his address in 1999, he called Christians to be unconditionally pro-life, which means that the dignity of the human life must never be taken away, even in the case of someone who has done great evil. So let us now look at the previous paragraph 2267 of, this is the one, as it stood in the year 1997. Assuming that the guilty party's identity and responsibility have been fully determined, notice all these conditions and caveats, the traditional teaching of the church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against the unjust aggressor. The only possible way. If, however, non-lethal means are sufficient to defend and protect people's safety from the aggressor, authority will limit itself to such means, as these are more in keeping with the concrete conditions of the common good and more in conformity to the dignity of the human person. Today, in fact, as a consequence of the possibilities which the state has for effectively preventing crime, by rendering one who has committed an offense incapable of doing harm, without definitely taking away from him the possibility of redeeming himself, the cases in which the execution of the offender is an absolute necessity are very rare, if not practically non-existent. Notice here in the previous paragraph that even though it says it does not exclude death penalty, it does so with great hesitancy, preferring non-lethal means. But it also contains a heavy qualification, only in cases where it is of absolute necessity. And then the Pope says, even these cases are very rare, if not practically non-existent. The last line was, of course, added by St. John Paul II in 1997. Now let's have a look at how the new paragraph looks like. All right, that's Pope Francis. The new paragraph introduced this year in August. Recourse to the death penalty on the part of the legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. So it doesn't deny what has happened before this. Today, however, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost, even after the commission of very serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. And lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensure the due protection of citizens, but at the same time do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. Consequently, now this is the part, consequently the church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. And she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. Now, what is apparent in this revision is not a small thing. All three paragraphs has been revised. It's an entire new paragraph made up of 3 sub-paragraphs. But then we can't judge the extent of the changes by just looking at the form. We need to examine its content. And one of the most important tools in being able to interpret this particular paragraph would come from this letter from the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. You see, whenever a change is made to canon law or legislation, it is usually accompanied by a letter from the congregation that is responsible for this. Now, this is the congregation responsible for teachings and therefore for the catechism. So Cardinal Ladaria asserts that this teaching constitute an authentic development of the doctrine, so that there is development. But that is not in contradiction with the prior teachings of the magisterium, which can only mean that the recent amendments does not deny the legitimacy in principle of the death penalty. Of course, he goes on to say, but today the present political and social situation may have changed. Therefore, what does this have to say? For anything, well, we cannot claim that the present amendment is now saying the death penalty, which was in principle, provided that you follow all those qualifications, and it was, then you have the principle of the double effect, and it was for the common good, that it was immoral. You cannot say that, which would mean that all persons responsible for that, and where a person was afforded a fair trial, all of them would have committed a mortal sin and therefore murder. That would not be the case. Furthermore, the specific word used to describe the death penalty here in this new amendment is inadmissible. Now, it's a strange word because it's a word usually used in evidence. It doesn't say immoral. And finally, it provides three conditions, and that was mentioned in the paragraph over there, okay, that warrants the changes. So, where St. John Paul II had felt such situations warranting the use of the death penalty, which were really absolutely necessary, were really rare or non-existent, Pope Francis is merely stating in a clearer way, well, those situations are no longer existent today. Therefore, the argument in favor of the death penalty should be regarded as inadmissible. The development reflects the fact that it's simply becoming harder and harder to argue that a particular act of capital punishment is circumstantially necessary to protect the common good. Both popes have not denied nor rejected the long-standing position of the Church with regards to the morality of the death penalty. So in the end of the day, is the Pope changing, as the headline said, Church teaching? Absolutely not. In fact, it would be contrary to Church teaching to say what was moral is now immoral. But Pope Francis is also saying, under the present circumstances, it is inadmissible. Just as revision does not necessarily translate into change, inadmissible does not necessarily mean immoral. Now, in short, the present position can be simply stated in these two axioms. Death penalty in principle is morally legitimate to protect the common good, if you fulfill all those conditions. But under present-day circumstances, it is no longer inadmissible. Now, we can spend the whole day arguing and debating. The text suffers from certain legalistic tautology and ambiguity, and sometimes some people will say even incoherence. In any case, Catholics today, what is our position? Well, we are obliged to continue believing that the death penalty in principle is morally legitimate, but because of our religious submission of will and intellect to the teaching authority of the Pope, Catholics must also work with determination for its abolition. Though Catholics may still be divided on their personal opinions with regards to the death penalty, and Pope Emeritus Benedict did mention this, that there is a whole wide spectrum of views, no one can deny the central tenet of our gospel, that which is of love, and that you are called to love even your enemies, that we are to do good to those who hate us, to imitate God who causes the rain to fall on both the good and the evil. Our present Pope has constantly reminded us to show mercy as the Heavenly Father has shown us mercy. And that begs the question, are we deserving of that mercy? And the answer is no, we are not deserving. Because if we were deserving of it, it would not be called mercy. We deserve punishment. That would be justice. The fundamental message here is that wanting the death penalty out of sheer vengeance or retribution is not and was never a spiritual or moral good thing to do. We can, of course, understand how people who have been grievously wounded by someone in their family or friends being murdered, raped, kidnapped, or, the horrors of drug trafficking. The death penalty was meant only to protect society. It was not meant to be a tool of vengeance. and we have to leave that kind of justice to God. We always have to hope that even the worst criminal can experience a change of heart and have a conversion as long as they have life and breath in this world. We hope that for ourselves too, right? So we as Catholic Christians should wish for their salvation. We would want to pray for their conversion, and we will want them to repent for what they have done. And always, let us never forget, Salus animarum suprema lex, that is, the salvation of souls is the supreme law.
Thank you, Father Michael. Wow, so much to digest here. I know all of us have heard about 2 hours worth of session, so to speak. Now it's your turn to speak. Now it's your turn to address whatever issues you have on the subject, be it on the matters which have been raised by the speakers or anything else on the topic. So if you have any questions or you want to pose to the speakers, please raise your hands. And when you raise your hands, please identify your name and the place or organization you come from. Thank you. Yes. Just give me a minute. Can somebody confirm whether there's a mic around? Do we have a moving mic around? Okay. Sorry, could you come to the front? Probably could be easier. Those who want to have questions, please come to the front. It's easier to use the mic. Yeah.
My name is Yong Yun Choi. I'm a member of the Malaysian Bar. This topic about capital punishment being a deterrent. The whole basis of capital punishment is a question of balance. On one hand, you see the horrors of the victims. And now, of course, Datuk Ma has mentioned the horrors of punishment, the horrors of capital punishment. Question is, where is the balance if we just take away that capital punishment? Now, the other thing is, a lot of statistics have been given to show that there is a rise of crimes and a lot of crimes relating to capital punishment. And can this be attributed to the fact that capital punishment is not a deterrent? My question is, originally when capital punishment was imposed, it was imposed on a human being, a life for a life. And if you look back at the history of a penal code, it came from India. And originally, it was a capital punishment for death of life. And of course, it has extended to other crimes that the society felt was that the society felt that they should not be in the society. They extended to to kidnapping offenses, extended to armed offenses, now extended to drug offenses. But are they really crimes that can be so horrible that can be equated to the horrors of killing a person? You're talking about crimes of drugs trafficking, drugs consumption, or whatever. In this case, it's Section 39B trafficking. There is an artificial creation, but it's basically a question of to change society, not to consume drugs. That being the case, now if capital punishment does not deter the consumption or trafficking of drugs, does it mean that it is not effective? If it is not effective, then there may be other approaches to the question of the drug problem.
Right, thank you, Mr. Young, because we want to keep the questions as short as possible.
Yeah.
Your question is now, where's the balance between the house?
That's one. But my second question is, the deterrent. Is there really a deterrent when we have extended the definition of crimes and punishment?
All right.
To the extent,
so whether it's an effective deterrent. Right, thank you. I'm going to give the others a chance. Yes,
one more point.
One more point.
To be effective as a deterrent, the capital punishment must be enforced effectively. Like, for example, Dato' Ma has mentioned that punishments, hanging, are not publicized. If punishments are not publicized, where is the deterrent? Where is the deterrent? Because they must be done hand in hand together. To be a deterrent, crimes and punishments must be seen, to be noticed, to be announced, to let people know. Of course, it's terrible to see it, but they are part and parcel of punishment, part and parcel of capital punishment.
Got you. Thank you. We lawyers start to get carried away in our statement, so we will keep your statement together. But I think I'll take the first one, because the other part, is it an effective deterrent? It's what the speakers have said. They've already given the statistics for that, so I won't go to that. But the first question is there a balance? Can I ask Dato' Ma?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, whether or not there is a balance, this is a question that is up for open debate. And as long as there's life, I think this question will continue. Because this is not cast in stone, and neither is it black and white. It's always a judgment call. But I think we have to look at as I mentioned just now, the logical and legal basis, the statistics that are available, and come to a conclusion. Because if you were to balance between the horrors of suffered by the victims' families, and also the horrors of execution, if you were to balance it, really, it is very, very difficult to do an arithmetic calculation. So I think at the end of the day, it's more a question of whether or not it is justified. And whether it's justified or not is very objective. Perhaps I can take this opportunity to just comment on what Father Michael has said. It would appear that the Indian position is very much what the church advocates. And that is, in India, while they have the death penalty, it's always reserved for the rarest of rare cases, the most serious of serious cases. But that's where the problem is, because it's then left to the judges to decide what is most serious, what is most heinous. I think the better alternative is to have it clearly set out in law. And if to say that there is no question of death penalty, then this is not something which will be subjectively dealt with by the courts. So if you talk about a balance, I can only say, please look at the photograph, the picture that I had, the scales are not level.
Thank you, Dr. Mal. Next, you've got the next question? Yeah.
Good evening. Before a question, I wish to bring to your attention to the fact that there is a federal minister and a government MP in the house over there. Well, Yang Berhormat Teresa Kok and Yang Berhormat Patu Kawan. I have honorable. I have one short question, one inverse question, and one advice to seek from all of you, and also to state my position. My short question is to our dear honorable judges.
Sorry, can you state your name, please?
Sorry, I'm Tai Zi Hao. I work for a opposition MP now, and I'm a chambering student at the same time, as well as I'm a social media manager. Okay, sorry. And my first short question is to address to our honorable judges that we always see in research and while during my A-levels that the two points that you mentioned to abolish death penalty, which is wrongful conviction, and if it's mandatory, it's prone for judges to acquit the accused. So based on your experiences, did you ever face this kind of choices in your life as a judge? That's my first short question. And my inverse question is pertaining to deterrence. Ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, if there is a deterrent in a punishment, then the deterrence effect part of the punishment will serve as the unfair punishment for that person. That is because you need to increase the punishment to attain the deterrence effect, and hence it's unfair. He has received an unfair punishment for his crime. I would like to deliver this question to all our speakers. And my third is to seek an advice from our speakers. I have made videos in 3 languages. I have written everything that you have mentioned about religion, about the points of laws, about wrongful convictions, and all I get from my viral post is a lot of lambastment, a lot of criticism from my fellow friends, family members, and of course the rest of Malaysian. And the MP that I worked, the former minister that I used to work for, was approached by the High Commissioner of UK, Her Excellency Vicky. And she asked, why don't you implement abolish death penalty in Malaysia? And the former minister says, I only adhere to the people. And the Malaysian people does not want this to be abolished. And I see it from my naked eyes in the social media. And the only 3 groups of people who are accepted gladly are those who are staunch in religion, those who are from the Bar Council, and those, half of them are, and those who are medical profession who are to save lives. And except for this, all are against it. So I wish to seek advice from the speakers. What can we do? And except for talks and tell them about God's love, except about laws and things. And last, to state my position, if I were given some little bit of time, since 1973 in the United States of America, there were 144 wrongful convictions that leads to wrongful execution, and these people die in vain. And in Taiwan, in the country, or probably region of Taiwan, 1997, there is a person by the name of Jiang Guoqing was wrongfully executed, and the last word was, I will transform myself into a demon and haunt those who framed me. That's what he said. Before execution, it might be funny for you now, but those words actually haunted me ever since I look at what he has said. Because of that, I want to ask this question to everyone, and for you to ask your friends, it is to state my claim. If a murderer was to be hanged for a crime that is murder, then who is there to be hanged for the crime of murdering these innocent people like Jiang Guoqing and 144 who are wrongfully executed by the gallows? Is it the execution officer? Is it the honorable judge? Is it the MP who allows the law, or the people who elected them, which is you and me? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you answered the last question yourself. You know the statistics, you know the figures, you know the people who have gone through. You should be able to do it yourself. Anyway, let me just take the first point. Is there a deterrent to it? Does it increase the deterrent? And wrongful conviction. So we've actually addressed that just now. But I'll ask Jagjit to address that for a moment before I go to the next question.
Hi, Teresa. Yeah, thank you for bringing me here. Right. Okay, thank you for the question and the comments. Now, wrongful conviction. Yes, there's always a possibility of wrongful conviction. Yeah, and that's why we should not have death penalty. Right. Okay. Very clear example, wrongful conviction. I said as a Sessions Court judge, a lot of my decisions were wrong when they went up to the High Court. Decisions were overturned, appeals were allowed, and the High Court decides one way or other. And subsequently, I'm not here to say that only the High Courts were right. High Court decisions, subsequent appeal to the Court of Appeal, have also been overturned. So if you want to ask for a fixed answer, there's no fixed answer. Yeah? So there is always this element of error in judgment. Okay? Now, it is not a scientific way of appreciation of evidence. It is based on experience, based on the evidence, based on the facts, and how you appreciate it. So, I may appreciate evidence the way I have been trained, my experience. Yeah? Whereas when the matter goes up to the High Court, it is looked at it differently. Yeah. So wrongful convictions, I think my learned brother here, Dato' Ma, would be able to say, confirm that. Yeah. Our decisions are always, I mean, we do the best that we can. We think that the decision is right. But subsequently, when it goes up on appeal, that's where we find that there's elements of error. Thank you.
Let's not forget, to err is human. Judges are human. I'm going to ask Dato' Ma whether you want to add anything to that on the wrongful conviction element.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. Could I just take the last question first by the last speaker? You were asking for words of advice. That will cost you. A teh tarik after this will be fine. But I think the best advice I can think of is to say the movement for abolition has been going on for a long time. And if we were to all support what the government intends to do and have the abolition take place, and then give it a trial, give it a period, if it is really not working, and then suddenly you find murders multiplying 10 times, and because there's no more death penalty, then because nothing in life is really cast in stone, it can be reversed, and then we will have a change of the law. Just to give an example, in 1960, in England, they abolished the death penalty. Now that's a long time ago. How many years? 58 years ago. And at that time, the argument was, much like when they decided not to have police officers armed. Do you know that the London Bobby has not been armed for a long time, unlike our police officers? The only policemen that are armed in UK are those on the SWAT team and so on. But there too, there was this argument that if the police officers were not armed, there would be a spike in crime and police officers would be killed and so on. And this has been proven wrong over the years. And up to now, that policy has not changed. Same with the death penalty. From 1960 until now, this policy of not having a death penalty remains. Now, if we are wrong to abolish the death penalty, well, who knows, maybe in time to come, you can have it reintroduced. As I say, nothing is cast in stone. The other about wrongful punishment, wrongful conviction, this is a reality. It can happen. And as Dr. Joy says, to err is human. But we have a process, the trial process, we have the appeal process, and it is not the easiest of things. Fortunately, as a magistrate and as a sessions court judge, they will not deal with the capital offenses because they don't have the jurisdiction. Death penalty is only from the High Court upwards. But as a DPP, when I prosecuted many of these cases, mainly under ISA in those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, so a lot of security cases and drug cases. And it would be a very, very difficult decision to decide whether to go for a capital punishment or not. And what is very important, of course, there must be facts and evidence to support it. And I think any DPP doing his job must really ensure that no evidence is ever planted, because it can happen. Police officers and other people can plant evidence. So this is definitely to ensure that no evidence is planted, and that's the job of the DPP to ensure that it's properly done. Any conviction, of course, can be overturned and set aside in the appeal process. But then again, whether or not it is a correct decision at the end of the day is left to be seen. So the other question was about unfair punishment. I think we have already mentioned this just now earlier on, so I need not elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Now, I'm just going to go on this side. On the last question, the piece of advice. They said, the gentleman just now spoke about, we know about the religion, talking about peace, harmony and all that. Doesn't seem to work with his friends. What other alternatives do you have?
Yeah, I'll take this mic. First of all, I would like to advise you, the person who raised the question, to be calm, because you're only hurting yourself. You can't change anybody. So I would suggest that you be calm, you be mindful of what you want, take a deep breath and meditate loving kindness on those who don't agree with you. You see, history has been made in Malaysia. We wanted to change this government for 61 years. When the time is right, the Buddha said this, when the conditions are right, then you will realize what you want. You will achieve what you want. Don't be so eager because you are only killing yourself. I seriously suggest that you take care of yourself first. If you do not have love within you, you cannot change anyone. You can only change people by your own personal actions. How you approach them with what you want. Yeah? Thank you.
So to the gentleman who asked those questions, the last one, I would like to commend you for your efforts in trying to educate the public with regards to some of these statistics and facts. I think one of the things that often happens with bloodthirsty mobs is that of ignorance. People really don't have the facts and they don't have the information. So it's always good to have information out there, and because sometimes we get all the wrong kind of information and we have good information like this. So I would think be persistent with regards to this. We have one of our bishops on the way to sainthood, Fulton Sheen, who once said, you know, when he was addressing a group of Catholic lawyers, he said, well, you need to swim against the current. He says, because dead bodies flow downstream, all right? Only the living can swim against the current. And I think the problem sometimes, and I guess I can understand the dilemma of politicians. They are voted in on a popular vote, hopefully, right? And therefore to give in to populism, which means that this is what the people want, all right? Even if it means lynching or something like that, all right? To swim against the current, and because something which is right should be right, even if the rest of the world is shouting, kill him.
Thank you. For question? Yeah.
I'm Dr. Fu. Can everyone hear me? Because I noticed that tonight's argument is all on one side, you know, that death penalty is very cruel and all that. But try to look at it from the other side. Death penalty is really too kind to the criminals. They should be kept alive and suffer. You know, hard labor in Siberia. We don't have Siberia, it can go up to, no, too kindness. Kota Kinabalu, you know, I think we should look at it the other way, you know. It's too easy. Just like the Nazis, you know how they kill people there? One guy go in there, asked to stand up against the measuring height. Next moment, he was shot from the back. That was very quick end. No suffering. So I think death penalty should not be allowed because it's too merciful.
It should not be allowed. It was too fun. I'm not sure how to respond to that, but thank you for the statement. Any other questions? Yes, can you come? Yeah, please come forward. We'll have one final question after this. Huh?
Just in response, I think Pope Francis said that life imprisonment is just as bad as death penalty. So he's in agreement with you. Torture them longer. Anyway, I just want to, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe you all know about it. But I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering, because, well, majority are Muslims, so they come under Sharia law. Is it possible to abolish the death penalty under the Sharia law? Okay, that's probably the lawyers. The other thing is just my feeling, all right, that we can abolish the death penalty we can have great laws, but it's not in isolation. If you have a corrupt system, no matter how good your laws are, there are ways to get around it. So what is your take? Then Father Michael, I'm so glad you addressed the issue, because this is the thing that's going on in my mind, that when St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, when they're agreeable to that, that in certain circumstances, death penalty or killing is, whatever you call it, is allowed, because you are under orders or you are carrying out. So I assume that when you say all these things, that it's the same for us. Nothing has changed. The circumstances, under which they put forth whatever they've written, all this stuff, as compared to what the Pope has done now. It's basically, we are still standing on the same grounds. Okay.
Thank you. On the death penalty in Islamic law, as far as I understand, we're corrected, but if anybody else can correct me, I think under the Constitution, there's limitations to what the Sharia court can sentence, and the limitation is that death penalty is excluded under the Sharia provisions. I think it's the 9th Schedule 2, Part 2 of the list of the federal constitution, so they can't do that. So that's as far as I understand. Anything to add from the two eminent persons?
No, you see, currently hudud law has not been passed yet, not implemented yet. So unless hudud law comes in, then this position may have to be relooked. Now, currently, at present, even the Muslims are subjected to civil criminal law. So as far as Muslims are concerned, they are also subjected to the federal constitution, and they are bound by all these criminal penal codes and so on. So, and as far as penal code offences are concerned, civil law offences are concerned, they are also subjected, and we can abolish the death penalty, and that has got nothing to do with hudud law. Thank you.
Sorry, if I may add to what Dr. Jagjit has said. I knew this question would be coming up sooner or later. We can't run away from this. Simply because in Malaysia we have a dual jurisdiction. Yeah? What we call the civil law, which includes the criminal law, but it's actually a misnomer. But civil law here means a secular law. Yeah? And as opposed to, on the other hand, Islamic law. So all Malaysians under the federal constitution, and everyone is under the civil law, which means to say, for example, you commit murder, it will be punishable under section 302 of the penal code. Now, as far as Sharia is concerned, obviously, I'm no expert in this, but obviously, Sharia law is limited to Muslims, and punishment for what you call amputation or death, that comes under hudud, but that is not enforced, and I don't know, as Dr. Jagjit says, there's something left for another day. But I think as far as the current law is concerned, it is the civil law that prevails, and this applies to everyone, Muslims and non-Muslims. And then on the other point about life imprisonment, I think the lady said perhaps life imprisonment is more cruel and worse off than the death penalty. One bullet might solve the problem. But when you talk about life imprisonment, which is 30 years, actually it's not the full 30 years. A life imprisonment, or any imprisonment, will allow for good behavior of the inmate while in prison. There will be remission of 1/3 of the sentence. So let's say if the sentence is 30 years and not more, then a remission of 10 years is allowed. But it's still a long time, 20 years. But then, of course, there is no risk of being executed. And I think that is I think that is a lesser of the two problems. Thank you.
Right. On the second question about corrupt laws and what's our take, I don't think the laws are corrupt. It's the people who administer them are corrupt. So if you ask me, there should be death penalty. It should be corruption where people take in public offices and take people's money. There should be death penalty for that, but otherwise it shouldn't be. Now, so I wouldn't go to that. The third question was on the Catholic perspective on what you've advise just now, Father?
Yeah, I think if you had looked at the slide, there are actually two statements to be made. The first one is the revision by Pope Francis does not comment on the morality of the death penalty in principle. What stands is what we have in Scripture, as well as the past teachings of the Church, the theologians of the Church, the doctors of the Church, whatever has been printed in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. That has not changed in that sense. But what has changed, there is a development. Now the Pope is saying that because of a greater awareness and understanding of the sanctity of life, as well as a development in penal laws, as well as in detention systems, therefore we should work for the abolition. It is no longer, the arguments in favor of capital punishment do not hold water today. So you have, in principle, this statement, you know, in certain cases, when all those conditions have been met, would it be legitimate to carry out death penalty? Yes. But today, the Pope is saying that based on those changed circumstances, it's no longer applicable. All right? So yes, the position has changed, but now the Pope is saying, given his reading of what's going on, the changes in terms of how we look at the penal process, as well as capital punishment, detention, and all these things, we as Catholics are, well, in a certain way, we have an obligation to work against it, all right? So it doesn't mean that we're going to look back in history and say all of them, well, they were wrong. But we're saying now, if we continue doing it, perhaps we will be wrong, okay?
Thank you. Last questions.
Hi, I'm a parishioner here at SIC, and my question is related to the Catholic side, which was touched on in the last part. My question is, the underlying argument against capital punishment is the ability of the current justice system, in the penal laws, in the capacity of the prison system, in the prosecution, to be able to detain criminals, you know, at a near perfect rate. In perhaps developed countries, or rather developing countries like Malaysia towards development, and perhaps in the US, in the UK, we have significantly okay systems. But even in those systems, there are flaws, as we all know. However, what about in countries which are much poorer, much less developed, with much less developed laws and capacity for detaining prisoners of very serious crimes? Do these circumstances, which allow for the capacity to detain prisoners that are not present in these countries, prohibit them from committing capital punishment when the lack in infrastructure makes this perhaps the only option for them? One example is the Philippines, where, you know, under Duterte, it was revealed that the entire justice system, the police system, the judges, there was a whole pile of corruption that were letting criminals in and out of prisons. So basically, to summarize, in the occasion where the justice system is significantly incapable of keeping prisoners in check, does the death penalty have an allowance in that? Thank you.
Father, your expertise in this.
You may go for your toilet break now. You know, there are three components to what you call a moral act or an immoral act. The nature of the act itself, whether it's good or it's evil, right? If it is good, it's always good, it's evil. But then there is other two points that need to be noted: the intention as well as the circumstances. So, say for example, to protect the common good, to protect the rights of other innocent citizens, the state has a grave duty to protect them. That's fine, all right? If the intention was merely just retribution, taking revenge, okay? In other words, they really need to suffer more for what they have done, then that's the wrong intention, which therefore renders the first principle as immoral, right? Even though it seems to be a good thing to always protect the rights. The third element is that of circumstances. And what we are commenting here with regards to the revision and what the Pope has written with regards to the reasons for the revision is based on the circumstances. And that was also the point given by Pope St. John Paul II. So it comes under the third element. And you are right, there are circumstances that may fall short of the ideal. And what about these places, therefore? Well, who makes that final judgment of whether it is flawed or it has to be a perfect system of detention before we move into this, all right? I don't have the answer for it. That's why I'm saying it is controversial, and there are people who are disagreeing with this, but as Catholics, you know, we are to submit in terms of intellect and will to the ordinary magisterium. Whatever has been changed is not, in that sense, dogma, all right? It's what you call doctrine, and there is a development. For those who are non-Catholics, never mind. This is the time to go and take a little break. But so there's this intricacies and nuances about whether a doctrine is defined. If it is defined, it means it came from Christ. If it came from Christ, you cannot change it because it comes from God. All right? Then there are elements of that which is doctrinal, and there is always a growing understanding of how that applies to different situations. In order for something to take place, and remember when I started, I said, this is not the first amendment. This is, in fact, the second amendment. The first amendment, perhaps, there wasn't as much controversy, as I said. You know, maybe it wasn't published in the in the internet. I don't know what happened in the 1997. Did any of you have internet, and did you go into, okay, all right. So it was not so well publicized. If it was done that, there would have been a hue and cry also about some of the changes that were made by Pope St. John Paul II at that particular time, all right, to reflect part of the teachings that he was giving. So I guess the response today, since the Pope is now calling Catholics to try to work for the abolition of the system, it would also mean that we should also work for an improvement of the detention system and to work for improvement of the court system, the judicial process, that everyone gets a fair trial. We should always be fighting for this because it's always in tandem, right? It's not just a matter of like, let's focus on this, all right? Let's just focus on the death penalty, whether we are going to have it or not. I think we should really work on the judicial system as well as the detention system and hope one day, eventually, in all countries, there will really be no need, no necessity, all right, for that. At this point of time, given what the Pope and his reading of the situation, he is saying it's inadmissible. Remember, he is not saying it's immoral, all right? And whatever it is, he's asking for Catholics to work together to abolish the death penalty, okay?
Right, thank you, Father. Now, I have to close the session for today, but before we end this session, I think I've been informed we have YB Teresa. She's with us today, our Minister of Primary Industries. So, YB, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes if you can share with us your thoughts on the subject matter. YB Teresa, please.
Thanks, Joy, Father and young Arif and all brothers and sisters here. When the cabinet, first of all, I must say that when the cabinet had unanimously decided that we should abolish death penalty, I was so happy because this has been the things that have been fought by the human rights groups for decades. And finally, this is the cabinet that come up with this decision. But then when I saw that after Datuk V.K. Liew announced it, it's a kind of a surge of criticism against the government on this decision. Okay, the online survey, I believe you all read the report, 80% and above against the abolishment of death penalty. So when I saw all these negative comments and criticism came, and I tried to approach religious leaders, religious groups, especially our Christian leaders and pastors and priests. I hope they can do something. They can at least organize a forum like this. But nobody hit my suggestion, only Joy. Can we give him a big hand or not? So I say, I'll guarantee his place in heaven. But anyway, I don't want to repeat what all the speakers have said. Deep down in me is worried. We worry because of lives. We come here to save lives. Like what Father said, you know, the supreme of law is to save soul, right? Salvation of soul and lives. Okay, I believe those who stay until this hour, meaning that you agree that you should save lives and not to kill more people. And more than 1,200 people are on the death row. And the government has been giving order that, you know, no execution. But with 80% people against it, what do you expect the government to do now? We're talking about democracy, right? So, in the end, will this be done or not? Now you look at the papers, Xinqiu, you know, and all other Chinese media, and Facebook. You look at the kind of negativity that come forward. That shows that a lot of people don't understand. They think that abolishing death penalty means we are encouraging crime. So we are going to have a lot of murderers and killers, you know, walking freely on the street. That is the kind of simplicity that have been put forward in the social media. Okay, I just want to talk long. This is the first forum after the cabinet decision has been announced. This is the first and only St. Ignatius take the lead. You should give yourself a big hand. Only St. Ignatius Church. Can you imagine that? Only St. Ignatius Church in the whole country talk about this topic. Can we do something or not? I think this is a time where we need to call for action. For the government, you know, we are elected by you all. I mean, in the end, if more than 80% of the people against it, that shake us. And I'm not sure if we, you know, push this bill in the Dewan Rakyat, will the law be passed or not? And you all have seen that in last parliament sitting, the anti-fake news bill passed by the lower house, rejected by the Senate. So we are in that kind of really have a check and balance situation in the Dewan Rakyat. And the Senate, those senators are not with us type. Majority are not with us type. So we are caught in this kind of situation. So lastly, I just want to urge that if you agree with what our father has said, what the speakers have said, can we do something or not? I think we all need to come out and do something. First, we have to read more, do a little bit more about what is death penalty and above. Just like our brother Tai Chi, how he mentioned that 144 innocent people have been you know, executed in United States since the independence. How about Malaysia? Now we cannot find anybody, but we read about in a lot of advanced countries all this have happened. Can we do something or not? I don't see any groups really come forward except Bar Council, that one miserable statement that said, you know, can we organize more? Suharka made that miserable one statement against the 80% of the people who think that we should have that penalty. Can we do something or not? If you cannot do anything, at least you come to pray. You pray. That is something, you know. But I think it's really time for us to have action. I'm worried, deeply worried. It's not because our government say not, that is a separate issue. It's lives. We are thinking about lives. We save lives. If we miss this opportunity to at least get the law be amended, you can forget about future. Future, it won't happen. Just how my colleague Kasturi just pointed to me, actually in the Dangerous Drug Act, Section 39B, if you possess 15 grams or more heroin or morphine, is that. It should be, there will be death sentence. Actually here say mandatory death, but in last parliament sitting, last government, the last sitting we have take out the mandatory, but just that, so discretion will be given to the judge. You know what is what 15 grams or not? 1 spoon of your sugar that you put in the, right now? 1 spoon of your sugar that you put in your coffee in the morning. That is that sentence. That is how strict is our law. So now, I just leave it to you all. I hope that, Joy, this won't be your last program, because I think you...
I don't need to do anymore.
It can make you, we can ask God to pray, to give you a bigger house in heaven. But I think the rest of y'all, since we're going to end now, if you are interested to do a little bit more, each of us can take one step, do a little bit more. It might be you initiate more of this kind of forum, maybe in other parish. This is something that we can start with. If you want to do something in the social media to touch the hearts and conscience of many others who are not in line with on this issue, this is maybe some little thing that we can do more. Maybe you might want to influence other parish priests to do similar program. Maybe you might want to get an interfaith group to go to organize some more. I think there are some little things all of us can have our influence. If you are interested, I suggest you come to approach Joy. Approach Joy so that we can also come up with equally strong voice and strategies on how to pass the information to the public and educate the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm not part of the government, by the way. Yes, sure. Sorry, I know it's not every day we get our member of parliaments here. If YB Custody, are you here? I give you 1 minute to say your piece. I know you got your sessions tomorrow in Parliament with a Parliamentary Action Group, which is a group of parliamentarians worldwide, and they are coming from The Hague, and they'll be here in Parliament tomorrow, 30th and 31st, to give those sessions, right? Is anybody from that group here? Because no, they're not here. Okay. This is YB Custody Part 2. It's not every time we get privileges of 2 MPs in our presence. So, your piece, please.
I think more MPs would have been here, but Parliament ended late tonight, so they had to hold the fort back there in the Dewan Rakyat. Thank you everyone for being here even until almost 11. So we trust that you have your heart in the right place because you want to know more about what you can do, as what YB Teresa has said, so we can be out there to advocate for the right to life. Remember 2 years ago, the theme of the Catholic Church was the Year of Mercy. And that year, the Catholic Church in Butterworth organized a walk on the right to life. At the end of the day, if you look at the kind of jobs by those who are serving death row, it's very rare you will see a Datuk's son, a CEO's daughter, a managing director's relative, a businessman, a millionaire. You would see a waiter, a lorry driver, a bus driver, an unemployed person, an illiterate, a marginalized minority who is on death row. It's very, very much an economic issue today. My heart was moved a year back at the execution of the Batu Malay brothers, if you know this case. If you read the details of the case, there is still one person at large. It's still stated very clearly, one man was killed. 3 people were investigated, 2 had been executed, but there's still a 3rd person at large. Now, how did these 2 people get executed when there's a 3rd person out there? If anybody can guarantee me today, here, that there will be no miscarriage of justice, then I will bay for blood and I'll support the death penalty. But no one can do that. No one can tell me that there will be no miscarriage of justice. This year, Gobind Singh Dio represented a South Korean boy. In a raid in his studio apartment in Negeri Sembilan, the raiding officer planted drugs in his kitchen cabinet. And this was proven by CCTV recording, which the raiding officer knew after a period of a few days, it would automatically erase itself. But lucky Gobind had good lawyers who recorded that CCTV recording on their phones and presented it in court as evidence. That raiding officer had conducted more than 20 raids. Now, what if it wasn't Gobind Singh Dio, big, burly, loud man, shouting at the raiding officer? What if it was a timid lawyer? He would have lied through his teeth and that poor South Korean boy would be serving time, waiting which Friday, and by the way, in Malaysia, executions normally happen on Fridays. Whether this Friday I'm going to be executed or not, next Friday I'm going to be executed or not, 4 Fridays down the road, end of the year Friday, nobody knows. It's like Russian roulette. Who decides who's going to be executed first? How long must you serve before you are executed? I don't want to be a part of this system. I don't want blood on my hands. I don't want to be a part of a government that bays for blood and executes people instead of the root of it, which is fighting crime. You often see 900 over people today on death row, young boys and girls, Malaysians and foreigners alike, are in for drug-related offenses, and they're all mules. Who put the drugs in their hands? Who made it, packed it, and gave it to them? Did they know it was in their bag? I have a UNICEF student from my constituency in Simpang Empat who is now in for 4 years under 39B. Why? Because she won a lucky draw prize organized by somebody. They went to India, and the agent gave her a bag and said, my sister-in-law will pick up these saris from you from Malacca. Just take it back to KL. She cleared Bangkok, she arrived in Sepang, and she got caught. Do we still want to keep the death penalty knowing there are innocent people there? I know the argument is always on the victim's family. But at the end of the day, as a society, you have to do what is right, no matter how difficult or how unpopular that move is. And with that, I thank you all again. I hope we will become vehicles to spread the word, as what YB Teresa said. What can we do? I think it's to organize pockets of discussions like this, to be able to speak about it. The best thing about the death penalty issue is that we can talk about it. And I think sometimes it's funny that some governments tend to always rely heavily on public opinion surveys, especially on the death penalty. I have yet to hear any government ask the public, do you like to pay traffic summonses? Because if you don't, then you don't have to pay. It would be like 110% of respondents saying, we don't want to pay traffic summonses, but governments don't ask you that. If you commit a crime, you pay. And the other misconception about crimes is that, like what YB Teresa said, you know, it's not that criminals walk free among us. I want to see criminals punished. I don't want them to be tortured, but I want to see them punished, you know. But punishment is not in the form of execution. Just to let you all know, there is a 2-day seminar in Parliament organized by the Parliamentarians for Global Action on the abolition of the death penalty. It will be joined by another global movement known as ECPM, also attended by our local CSOs like Amnesty International, ADPAN, MADPAT, and this time we have Women's Aid Organization joining us as well. Awam will be with us. Sisters in Islam, the Bar Council, of course. So it's quite a formidable force, you know, urging the government to do what is right. And I think the time is now, you know. It's a journey towards a total abolition, but in time, you know, you have to take, everything can be so easily politicized in Malaysia. So I hope, I'd like to see 39B first, you know, total abolition of the death penalty, at least for 39B offenders. But the devil is in the details. I will let the legal eagles deal with it with the Attorney General. And once again, I hope this is just not a one-time thing that we meet, and we hope to meet soon. And there are other MPs as well who are very passionate about this. Please talk to them about it. If they're not passionate, make them passionate about it. Tell them we put you there, we can also take you out. With that, I thank everyone for your time and your patience.
Thank you, YB. Now, you have heard our two YB speak about it. When you talk more about the subject, you spread it around, you talk more about it, people will start listening. When they do listen, there'll be a change. So it's up to you to make that change. My dear friends, we come to the end of the evening. Thank you for being so patient here. Thank you for being with us throughout the evening. I just have one question for you, which Dr. Ma had posed to you from the beginning of his talk. Has what has been said today changed your views? If you come here with a different view, has what has been said today changed your views on the death penalty? I'm going to ask Dato' Ma to give the last closing words before we conclude.
Thank you. I don't think we'll ask for a show of hands on whether or not you have changed your view, but you know within yourself, and if you have, in support of the abolition, go and spread the word. I think what YB Teresa Kok and YB Poto have said is absolutely correct. It needs further discourse, public discourse, and discussion. And I think, yes, on the 30th and 31st, there will be this PGA, Parliamentarians for Global Action, and members of Parliament speaking on the death penalty. I think the topic is standing against the death penalty. And believe it or not, my session on the 31st, it's 11 o'clock, and that session is maintaining dignity in the death row. I do not know where on earth a topic like that came about, because if you are already in death row, there's absolutely nothing to maintain, there's no dignity. So I'll probably finish that in 5 minutes. But I think the one very important question, can I just take one point? The question by a gentleman there just now, if I understand you correctly, you said, what if the jurisdiction, or rather, what if the legal system is less advanced than in developed countries? I think that's an absolutely brilliant question. You're actually talking about law, liberty, and morality at different levels. It's a very philosophical, jurisprudential issue, but I think it supports the contention that in less developed jurisdictions, there should be a bigger push for abolition, simply because the access to justice will be lesser than in a more developed society. So can you imagine a country where the judicial system is not well established, people don't have access to lawyers, judges are corrupt and so on. Can you imagine how innocent people might be railroaded? So I think that is one point in support of abolition. And then the question was, I think YB Teresa asked, what can we do? I have one thing to suggest, and this I'm putting on my Sohakam hat. I want to publicize. We are celebrating World Human Rights Day on the 8th of December. Mark it in your diary. It's a Saturday, and most probably we held on Jalan Raja itself in front of Abdul Samad building, and it will be officiated by the Prime Minister. So we have moved mountains. We have got a man who is now committed to acknowledging and encouraging human rights in this country, and he's coming to officiate our Human Rights Day, and the abolition of the death penalty will be a big part of the agenda for that day. So please come along, bring your friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato' Ma. Incidentally, YB Teresa, there's no timid lawyers around, huh? Just for you. Anyway, we come to the end. I think we've got some gifts for our presentations for our speakers. Yeah, can you? Yeah.
Dear friends, I hope that, like me, you would have found today's presentations interesting, entertaining, and hopefully enlightening on the topic of the forum, which was the death penalty. Is it a deterrent? Now, I hope that the presentations may have persuaded you one way or another on whether the death penalty is a presentation. Now, I would like to invite Father Andrew Wong to present our speakers and our moderator with a token of appreciation. Preferential. Joy, yeah. Where is this? And Joy, you too. Okay, on behalf of St. Ignatius Church, can we all collectively thank all our speakers? With that, all that's left for me to say to all of you is thank you, good night, and God bless.